The following program contains coarse language, a lot like real life. Viewer discretion is advised.
Oh yeah, viewer discretion is always advised when the wolf is dancing around. Good evening, everybody. Broadcasting live again from the 19th Ward, Rochester, New York. Another episode of Dancing with Wolves, episode 98. Got my sister Heather Salome, the vampire witch / death priestess. She's going to be joining us. She's going to be telling us about her adventures in Avalon, what she's learned, what she's brought back with her. And tonight's going to be a little bit more interactive for anybody who's out there. Along the way, we will open it up for questions and conversation. So if you're on Facebook or YouTube or now on Twitch, as I've been informed by my witch, yeah, you can interact here. We, again, simply only ask to keep it respectful. We will respect anybody's perspective and obvious beliefs or feelings on things. My philosophy is simple: take what you need, leave the rest behind. But knowledge is power, so when we can explore these things, sometimes we can learn some stuff. So I want to shout out a couple of people, a couple of things, as they say. I want to shout out, first and foremost, my brothers over at Rochester Free Radio. And there's a picture of Slosh, Deb Magoni, and my brother Brian Judah, who is our station manager. And we've been trying to incorporate some of the things that we do. Here's myself, Ed Contini in the middle. We are Brian the Good, Ed the Bad, and I graciously get to be the ugly. Couple of shows coming up down the pike. Rock Against Dystrophy, March 23rd, down in Port Monmouth, New Jersey. That's Route 36, Jersey Shore. That's for Brother Turbo, the Under My Skin for Life Foundation. It's for the brothers. It's going to be a memorial show, but also importantly to raise money and awareness, for muscular dystrophy. Those of you who know me know I have been involved with this foundation for a number of years, as has my son. So much love and support for what they're doing. I also want to shout out Bonded by Darkness. They got a show coming up March 8th over at the Vortex in Akron, Ohio. It's going to be Bonded by Darkness with special guest Orion Sword, The Crossing, and Hectic Ballroom. You can check them out online, social media, all those groovy places. Great band. I'll be playing a little bit of their stuff later. I've been playing a lot of their stuff because, again, they're friends and I really appreciate what they're doing. But if you want to go out and you want to see some great music, $10. I mean, you can't even park at most places these days for less than $10, let alone get a whole bunch of bands for a really cool show. I also want to shout out my brother Steve Ball, his band, The Dogs. They're going to be performing February 2nd here, Rochester, New York. You can check that out online, Facebook, all those great places, or on rochesterfreeradio.com. And as I scroll down here, I want to also shout out my brother Doug McDonald, a.k.a. Art for Sickos. He's a really cool guy, great musician. He's going to be doing a lot of stuff with us at the radio station, musically and otherwise. As always, I want to get back down here. So we've got Lily and Nona here, a.k.a. Diane and Ativia, Lily and Nona's Emporium. You can check them out on Facebook.com/Lily and Nona. Items created and curated into timeless treasures and handcrafted wonders with style. These are women within our circle, myself, Shy, and others, really great people, really great stuff that they're doing. And I can't say enough about what they do. And of course, my lovely witch, Lady Shia, she has her lives, the psychic show that a lot of you may be familiar with. Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Friday nights, at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She does a lot of really cool stuff. She also has a mentorship circle for those of you who would like to get deeper and learn a little bit more.
Are you ready to deepen your spiritual journey? If so, let's take it to the next.
Here we go. This is the one that I wanted. Yes, there it is. You can learn more at ladyshia.com. You can also find her on Instagram, Facebook, all those groovy places, all over social media. I, of course, have a couple different shows I do over at WRFC, Monday nights, 9 to midnight. I got the Music and Magic Show. You can check that out at rochesterfreeradio.com/listen, or you can find the listen button in there. I always try to make it a little bit easier for people just because it can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. You know, that this is what it is these days. And again, I'm going to throw this up. We also have our little thing, the good, the bad, and the ugly, Friday mornings, 9 a.m. to noon. Excuse me. We're doing a morning show. A little bit different format of things. But again, you can check that on rochesterfreeradio.com. I don't have that graphic loaded up, so I'm going to have to put that back in at some point. I also want to shout out my sister, Ashley Hart. And let me get down here. Here we go. She's one of our dear sisters from over there in Canada. Dream Catchers with Intention, and a whole bunch of stuff that she crafts. Absolutely beautiful stuff. We have a bunch of things that she's designed, Dream Catchers and other. You can find her on Facebook.com/Hearts, HARTS-Creations. And let me get down to this one because I don't want to forget it. It's just been kind of, we got so many people that we're trying to work with, as they say, and it's not always easy to keep it separated. And again, I don't think I actually have Sanctuary Marketplace. That's the witch coach stuff that she does. Yes, I don't think. I'm looking for the Mythic Treasure stuff. Yes, Shia is working on that, so we'll have a graphic soon for that. But Mythic Treasures does the fair every third Saturday. Shia does a lot of stuff down there. So if you're in the Rochester, New York area, over in there in the Tots Plaza in Henrietta, it's a really cool thing. A lot of really cool vendors, free type of thing. You can go in there, check things out, interact. But again, that's every third Saturday up here in Rochester, New York. I want to thank Eileen. Yes, great music. Thank you. That was one of the first tracks my son and I kind of really wrote and produced together. Matt Brown on vocals, Jeff Thal on drums. And it really reflected, at least for me, it was a cathartic dive into not only elements of death and perception of it, but for me, the religious undertones that kind of, left an impression on me. This is, again, not to take a shot at anybody's beliefs. If it works for you, great. It doesn't always work for all of us. So again, the views, expressions, thoughts, etc., are mine and mine alone unless you choose to share them. Sometimes we use words that can be offensive and triggering to people, like fuck or others. Now, again, I try not to do too much of the shock value, but sometimes I will hit it just because it speaks to me in a particular way. Again, take what you need, leave the rest behind. You don't have to necessarily agree or believe into it. And we like to believe that by looking at things, or even just listening to another perspective, sometimes it will give us insight. Sometimes it'll give us strength. Sometimes it'll give us hope, perception, any number of things. And listen, sometimes it'll just fucking piss us off. That's why it's so easy to just, hey, change the station. Don't get me wrong. We'd love you to hang out. But I understand, and I don't begrudge anybody who, again, for whatever reason, feels the way they do. Now, I see this little odd graphic the witch coach keeps throwing out. I have no idea what the hell that means. So I'm just going to kind of spit in confusion. We live in an age now where I don't even know what half these avatars mean. Special shout out to Renee, tuning in from the western mountains of Canada. We got a lot of friends up there in the great north. Yeah, listen, I have no idea. All I see is a smiley face type of thing. I don't know who that is. Yeah, it doesn't come through the same way for me. This is the joys of doing a live show. I don't know what the hell's going on, but I'm trying to do my best from it. So yeah, we're coming up close to 100 episodes. I've been doing this show now a little over 2.5 years. It was born out of one of Shia's lives, and somebody had made the commentary, "Hey, Wolf, why don't you just go do your thing someplace else on another show?" So I was like, yeah, you know what? Why not? So the podcast was born out of that. A lot of other things were born out of it, the radio show and some of the other things that Shia and I have been working on. I want to shout out my brother, Jonathan Porter. He's going to be on with me next week. We're going to be dancing some stuff. He's worked with me on some music. He's come out and supported some of the different charity events that's gone on out here, and he's a really great guy. So we're going to talk about his journey, his experience, and a little something that he and I have been working on. But again, tonight, Heather Salome is going to be dancing with us. So I'm going to jump into a track while I go get her, bring her on live, and then we'll start this death dance. So sit back and enjoy. And I think I'm gonna kick it off with some Bonded by Darkness. So this is one of their video tracks that they released not too long ago. They're working on some new music. Again, really great band. Check them out online, social media, all the groovy places where all the cool kids hang out. So sit back and enjoy a little bit of this, and then we'll be back.
You were born to go away, not in the dirt. You were a lamb. I told you not to come for me. 6 feet under, we were meant to be.
So yeah, welcome back. That was a little bit of Bonded by Darkness. Really great band. And again, check them out. They'll be doing a bunch of shows through the years. They're recording some new stuff. Really great people. Much love, Josh Raven and everybody else in the band. So as promised, I've got Heather Salome with us. I have your graphic with all your I will walk into fire with you and help you rise from the ashes.
Yes.
Promo
Yes.
stuff. So for anybody who's actually watching the podcast and not just listening to it, there are a bunch of different ways that you can reach out to her after the show. Gmail. We have www.vampire, and vampire spelled VAMPYRE -witch-Salome, SALOME.com. We also have over on Instagram, same thing. Vampire_witch_Salome, Facebook, Vampire Witch Salome, and TikTok. You're one of those TikTok girls now. Vampire_witch. I'm terrified of the TikTok. I don't even want to. And Shai's got us on Twitch now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I try it, and I did the TikTok thing, and I got really hooked on doing, because I'm a theater girl, so I love musical theater stuff. So I got hooked on doing lip syncs, and it was supposed to be for my business. So I don't really do much over there anymore, but I plan on going back and doing more speaking and stuff like that. But right now, it's just more of a, if you want to see me doing silly lip syncs and crazy makeup, then you can check it out right now, and then hopefully in the near future there will be more content.
You do a really good presentation. I saw what you did over Halloween weekend there in Saratoga Springs. You had your assistant there, Elizabeth. You guys really, again, it's honest, but it's also engaging. You know, there's energy, there's an atmosphere. And, you know, you work it from a couple of different angles. You know, you have the vampire end, and now you have expanded. You have evolved, as we said last night.
Yes, I have evolved. I went into my coffin and come out another form of vampire witch, and that is as the Death Priestess, which is, it's kind of funny that when I started embracing this new direction in my journey, I was like, it's a bit on the nose, isn't it, universe? And, you know, it's like, because you vampire witch, obviously death and spooky, and it's kind of, it seems on the nose, but this is my light work. And I always joke around with people that, you know, they refer to themselves as light workers, or refer to people who do psychic readings, witchcraft, or certain types of witchcraft anyway, as light workers. And I'm like, and I am the dark and spooky, because I don't like that. I don't vibe with it. I don't feel like it's not me. I love it for them, because we need light workers, absolutely. But I was always like, I'm a shadow worker. This is my shadow thing. I will go through, as I said, the mountains of madness. I will go into the fire with you. We will work through the icky things. And going into that, the Death Priestess, it turns out that is my light work. That is where my light working is meant to be done. So the shadow work stuff is the vampire magic, the identity magic, helping people with transitions, helping people with their fears and coming into their power and calling their power back, and hands-on mentoring with witchcraft. I do have students that come to me and learn how to create a very personalized practice that doesn't necessarily go into any particular initiatory tradition. How do you start a spiritual practice in witchcraft and witchery, you know, and make it your own? So this new direction that I went into is it's
part of your journey.
It's part, and it's part of that. It's all the shadow stuff, but it is bringing light into it, because you cannot have a value to life without it being a transient thing. You can't really have an authentic, fully realized life without seeing the fact that it's going to end at some point. So you got to do it now. You can't just kick that. I used the term a lot yesterday in the radio show about kicking the can down the road. because of the distance we have from talking about death or thinking about our own desires for what a good death would be for us, or what we want with the care of our bodies afterwards, or the care of the earth afterwards. And it's a macrocosm thing. It's a big picture thing. So last night I was talking about all of the reasons why it's important in your own personal life to start facing thoughts of death and dying. And it's not to like conquer the fear and get over it. It's to come to a sort of piece of understanding so that you are not making decisions out of fear, but instead out of authenticity and understanding you only get one time around in this particular meat suit, as I called it. You only get one time around in it. And so if you want to do it, you got to do it now. Or, what is most important, and grieving and giving space to grief and giving space to the sacredness of life and death. So I was talking about the individual because I'll go into the why it's important to the other side of it was once you do that, what happens and what it looks like. But the macrocosm is that this world and this country is dying.
Yeah,
there's
no way around that. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, it is. It's not giving it's like, oh, I feel like I'm sick. No, it is a death rattle at this point, and we are looking right at it. And we're still like, oh, it's just a cough. No, no, it's not. And it's the thing that's happening. I've noticed a lot of younger people and people new to the craft, or even older practitioners, becoming shadow workers, becoming people who are drawn to this kind of more exploring the liminal spaces, the taboo, the stuff that was even in traditional like Wiccan or witchcraft that's considered left-hand path stuff, because we've denied it for so long that we can't anymore. And it's a call to arms almost of these shadow workers, these death priestesses, death priests, to midwife or midwife our world, our country, our whole existence into this new structures. Like we have to do it if there's going to be survival, which we also talked about last night. When death became an option to people who are younger, the younger millennials and the older millennials and the younger Gen Zs and Gen Alphas and stuff, like when that became an option, that's a viable option if everything goes sideways, there's something very, very wrong.
Well, I like one of the things you framed in it, and it's something that I have the first page of those new 3 graphical things that we discussed. And you talk about death positivity, and specifically as part of death positivity movement. Explain a little bit more about what that actually means to you and what that frames for you in all of this.
Okay, so death positivity is something that I love the term, first of all, because you know it's a little jarring and it makes you go, wait, you're going, yay, death and yay. No, it's not that. It's not we're like, yay, dirt nap. I'm gonna go dive in and I want to just die. No, it's not like, yay, I'm gonna die tomorrow. No, death positivity. It's the same thing as the sex positivity movement, when we had sex positivity, where it was no longer a taboo, it's bringing it into the light, calling the thing for what it is, exploring the different experiences through the different lenses of all people who experienced life, sex and death and all that stuff, and bringing it so that we can explore it as a human consciousness and come to an acceptance that not everyone's story with death is going to be the same, but it's also something that is universal and universally experienced all through your life. It's not just a thing that happens at the end. You experience it multiple times, from whether it's your first pet to a beloved uncle to your own parents to, maybe you become terminal, and having an understanding and acceptance of the finality and the inevitability of death allows you to go there with a sense of peace. Because maybe even if you don't believe in an afterlife, you want to have a good death. And it doesn't mean like it's a grand, for some people, it can be that grand, I want to go fighting so I can go to Valhalla. Because I know that there's a desire there. but the good death.
Just a little bit.
There's a little bit. There's a lot of that, actually, especially right now. But it's about what does it look like for you? Like, do you want people around you while you're transitioning from this phase to whatever comes next? Or do you want to be solitary? Do you want minimal interactions? Do you want people to touch you? Do you want to die at home? Do you want to die in a hospital? Do you want medical care? Do you want people to make you more comfortable with like heavy sedation? Like, these things are important to think about. And the death positivity is thinking about it as not something, I can't think about that right now. You know, it's not something that it's avoiding. It's a positive thing to think about, to plan, because it's a positive thing to know what you want so you can have the peaceful ending to your life story.
And also, too, you hit upon, and conversely, the fact that these things have been not only driven out of our communities, but have been kind of co-opted and weaponized, and to use your words, literally, quote unquote, has had terrible consequences and implications in all levels of society. It affects elements of mental health, which obviously can lead to, you know, depression, alcoholism, drug addiction, you know, so there are so many little variables that you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, these things are connected together, but they kind of really are, either by the fear variable, which you mentioned right off the bat, or the apathy, you know, especially when you look at how some elements, especially within, you know, cultural frameworks here in Western civilization, quote unquote, death has been really kind of watered down. You know what I mean? It's almost a meme in many ways. And not to say that that doesn't have its place, because I believe in the comedic edge, but when people are conditioned to not even give weight to elements of death, how do they live properly? And obviously the analogy is, well, they're not able to live properly.
So sometimes it might go in a hole, so I apologize. But yes, so we've disconnected death from the community and from ourselves to terrible consequences, because we're able to like do this thing where we can compartmentalize it so well that it's almost like a big walled off block, and we can be like, well, it doesn't matter because it's not affecting me. And I don't really want to, I don't need to think about that yet because I'm young, I'm healthy. You know, we always have the quotes of tomorrow's never promised, or, you know, the boy we call a present, you know, that it's a gift because we don't know what's coming. We never know if we'll wake up tomorrow and what it'll look like. But for some reason, it doesn't move past the words into our consciousness and our literal living space, like how we live our lives. And that has to do with, well, we first have to survive. We have to put a roof over our head, and we have to pay our bills and make sure our kids are fed and everything like that. So one does not want to have to stop and have these deep thoughts of, oh my gosh, my impending demise while I'm in the middle of trying to pick between Honey Nut Cheerios or regular Cheerios.
Yeah,
you know,
well, I mean, isn't that the framework between the goddess and the vampire? And I have that next slide up. And, you know, it is, I think, worth mentioning that, you know, it's unique to the individual. So whereas, you know, these are your perspectives and experiences, the application into our own lives just really requires us to get into, as you mentioned, into that shadow work. We have to explore the aspects not only of our upbringing, but, you know, where we're at in any particular given moment, because there's so many other variables that come into play, culturally, religious, you know, et cetera, that will frame it. And I like the one end thing, well, kind of toward the end, you say there's nothing inherently evil about destruction or death. How else can you clear away obstacles to build something new?
Right. Like how if nothing died and everything lived forever, nothing new could ever be created. And, you know, there's that whole people who are living too long who shouldn't be in office as long as they are. Look at that. That is a very, very concrete example of things that should be dying and aren't.
Why aren't they dying?
I'm not wishing it on the people.
Well, I mean, really, that almost feels you're making a case that we already have zombies living amongst us.
Well, is it that big of a leap?
Listen, I'm gonna, you know
I'm
me.
Sorry, I know zombies are a thing you don't want to be part of.
I'm not going to become a zombie, but I do recognize that, you know, again, and all joking aside, that, you know, application of words sometimes, It's just limited by our understanding. So yeah, there's a lot of zombie-like attitude. People go through the motions. They tend to ignore, this horrible shit. I was watching Bill Maher Friday night, and he did a really good piece, and he was talking with Seth MacFarlane, and he was just talking about why can't we empathize that, death is bad no matter what. And he was talking about the conflict in the Middle East, that, why can't I care about people dying on both ends? Why does it you can only care about one side or the other? The other side becomes marginalized now. They're less than, so their deaths don't count. And they made a really good point. And it was interesting that it was a common ground that they actually found with some of the stuff, in that we have lost some of our ability to be human. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be a debate that death is bad in these particular context scenarios. You know what I mean? Nobody wants,
or how much death is too much.
Right. Nobody wants bombs dropped on them, and nobody wants to see a little child blown up, and nobody wants to see anybody's heads fucking cut off or any of that type of shit. And granted, you have your extremes where, and I don't even factor that into it, because I call it the mouth of madness. You're never going to understand it. You're not going to get through. You know what I mean? These are things that are so far out of whack that they are the anomalies that exist. So not unlike a rogue wave, you just got to ride them through. But it doesn't mean that we can't have the conversations. And more importantly, it doesn't mean that we can't call it out and say, hey, no, this is fucked up.
Yes. And that's actually part of the death positivity movement, is by bringing death to popular conversation, to regular conversation, and having the thoughts of what your death wants to look like, what a good death looked like for you. You can understand and have compassion for the sheer horror of everyone who does not have a good death. It's the there's bad deaths on both sides, but we don't allow space to grieve, because that's the other part of it. This is where I'm kind of you said we lost humanity for a while, and I absolutely think that that's a key point. For a while, we went into this mode of numbness into our human core, where if it didn't directly affect your finances, your ability to get to work, or your own family or whatever, it didn't matter. It wasn't as important, as long as maybe it'll affect gas prices, and that was your concern.
And that'll drive people more insane than anything. It's just it's costing me money, right? But there's this whole undercurrent right now, and it's something I've observed over the past, since October. There's a whole undercurrent of people who are carrying grief for what is going on right now in the Ukraine, in the Middle East, and then the Sudan and the Congo and Syria, and to the native peoples of America that are lost, the missing women and everything. And there's awareness. There are people who are screaming for us to listen to the people who've been screaming about it for 60 plus years. So 70 years even. And it's this almost like awakening, this little stirs. And for some reason, at this point in time, at this juncture, all of the tricks and everything that have worked in the past to shut people up are not working. Mostly because they forgot, those at the top forgot about bread and circus. They took away our bread and circus, therefore we care. But that's being a bit cynical about it. There is also an undercurrent of this awakening of the humanity inside of people. And I think it's a really hopeful thing, and a thing that we need to, this is also why I'm doing this work. It's because that pain that people are carrying right now for what's going on in Palestine, in Israel, in Ukraine, all over the world, all of these things that are starting to even the ones who are I don't want to think about it. My mental health is too important. It's bothering you now for a reason, because your humanity is. And it's not going to go away. It has a tendency to carry over. Away. There is a collateral damage. Right.
Yeah. But also your mental health is important. So, take care of that too. But there's a reason why you're feeling this more now than you did possibly even in any of the other conflicts and things that we may have been outraged at, quote unquote, for the actions and then kind of forgot about, you know.
Well, I think there's to some degrees a general frustration because we continue to repeat these things. It's tragedy after tragedy. It's a school shooting. It's a this. It's a that. Bombs dropping here. Bombs dropping there. You mentioned, you talk about, and I know you'll get to this a little bit later, but there's also a dynamic, not just within our own species, but the eco-tragedy of the death of elements within, you know, animals and plant life. You talked about fireflies. You know, Einstein famously talks about, you know, the bees, and, you know, we are really, you know, so disconnected to these elements because the corporate interest, let's be honest, it's not profitable to them. So it becomes, you know, polarized. It becomes a fucking Facebook meme. Oh, you know, you want to shut down small businesses because, you know, blah. And it's just like, no, man, I don't want to wipe out the fucking planet for a company just to make a couple fucking dollars. You know, we really at this juncture can do better than that. And it just, you know, it has always been this kind of self-serving, you know, fear mongering. And it goes back to the fear element. So I know you got a list. So where do you want to jump in now?
Well, I'm going to continue with what you were saying because it kind of goes into it. And that is when you say the corporate element takes over and starts saying, you know, well, this, you know, we can't have this happen. So why do we go along with it? Why do we agree to this? Because you and I are talking about it and we have this knowledge, and we're not alone in this. We have a whole community, and there's communities everywhere that are like, this is horrific, and are screaming for it. So why did we go along with it? Well, when death was taken from the hands of the families, from the hands of the communities, and put into an industrial setting where it became this billion-dollar industry because they said it was a harm to public health because the dead bodies were toxic and threatening, and you need a professional to handle it. And it's this whole thing where it's removing it and saying, well, let's commodify this. Let's capitalize on this because, you know, this, and it starts in the Civil War, really, because that's where the embalming really took off, was the Civil War, because people were getting their loved ones back in terrible conditions because they had to ship them and they did not have like coolers or freezers. So embalming was a way to bring back your loved one, to honor them, so you can look at their face one last time.
We could feel more comfortable about it. Let's really be blunt. We didn't want to deal with the horror of it.
Right. And that's totally fine. I think that's actually very important. And it was a great invention for that purpose. But then, of course, we get embalming is necessary for the public good, for the public health. So you need the embalming. It's a sanitary procedure, and it's supposed to keep everything clean. Meanwhile, it is absolutely poisoning the ground because it is the most toxic substances used. And I'm not saying that embalming is terrible in all cases. There's absolutely needs for it. That are moments that are called for embalming when necessary, but it shouldn't be the default, and it doesn't have to be. That is something you're allowed to refuse, but you do have to check with your funeral home because they are the final say on it. Like, they may say you can refuse embalming, but we won't let you have an open casket, which is kind of silly because you can actually just put a body in a freezer. And, you know, they take them out to thaw and everyone, and they look fine. It's an aesthetic. Not
unlike ice cream, you know what I mean? Yeah, it may melt. Right. You leave it out for a while, it melts, but as long as you keep it in the freezer, it'll be, you know, it'll be good.
It cool, you keep it, So there's this whole thing and this industrialization idea of that. And we've done that with almost every aspect. And it's interesting because what you have up here is about the goddess and the vampire part. Because traditionally, death work, death tending, the end of life care was given to the community's women. So of course it becomes something that's evil and icky and not safe and superstitious and witchcrafty, and let's get rid of that and let the men in black take over.
But here's the irony: you and I both know it. Yeah. Women are the source of life. So in its own kind of fucked up little way, it's just like, okay, well, since you guys are to blame for bringing us in, we're just going to slap the death on you as well, too. But I think also some of it too, and this is being explored more, and we know it from sociological and just from scientific elements. Conditioning, especially within gender identity, tends to frame things differently. So for men, we tend to be conditioned to laugh at death. Death is not something you really want to entertain. I use the Star Trek James Kirk analogy that he doesn't believe in the no-win scenario. He doesn't face death because he's a macho body. That's his fucking MO. You know
denial of death is part of the machismo thing.
Right.
But I mean, when I say it was in the hands of the women, there was usually the communities women would come. They were the ones who would, because it's not necessarily that they got slapped with death because they're the life bearers. It's more like we are the midwives and the ones who bring life into this world. Where else would we be than bringing life to its next phase, which is out of this world? It's the thing I tell my sons is the mother's prerogative. I brought you into this world. I can take you out.
See, my mother used that shit against me all the time as a kid.
I think we call it the mother's prerogative. But and the other side of it is we actually are tending the soul and the sacredness as a women. But I know when I say it's in the hands of women, the community women would come and assist, but also allow the families to be involved. So the families, men and women, would wash the body, sing over them, tell their stories. Sometimes there would be laughter, which is that's a common thing, is to laugh at stories and anecdotes, to remember the joy and honor the sacred vessel that carried the person you're loved one. So it's, when I say it was in the hands of the women, it was those community women who would come, the ones who would bring the food so you wouldn't have to cook, so you could have the time and space to grieve. The ones who would go, if you did a church, even in the church before we had industrial complexes, the Christian church, the women would still tend bodies and do the church potlucks and stuff to bring them to the families, so that all they had to focus on was this time and this space to grieve, to say goodbye, and the body would be in the home, and for however many days that they managed to keep it before it had to be buried or cremated, whatever their decision was. But then they would bury it with minimal pomp and circumstance. There wasn't hundreds of thousands of roses that were shipped from Ecuador to put over the casket. And I say this as a florist who did a lot of funeral arrangements. But
there's also a deep biting sarcasm that's coming out. Like, let's kill something else to celebrate the death, and it's just this ugly little cycle.
Right. Well, then we had that era after in Civil Wars, the embalming, and then the boomers. Baby boomers. Sorry, but you guys got to ruin everything, right? But they are the ones that when their parents came home from the war and there was that boom in the economy, it became the funerals almost became a dick measuring competition. Like, whose funeral was bigger and better? I want a hearse, and I want a 10-gun salute, and I want all of the flowers, and I want these monuments to myself built on top of me, and I want to spend $160,000, probably only $60,000 back then, on this funeral. And that became the norm.
Well, it became, I think, and I'll use the analogy because this is what always jumps out to me. When you start framing in some of the religious elements, the religious dogma, there became a trend, and I'll just use the Catholic Church as an example. The more lavish the funeral, the more, I guess, chance you were getting into heaven, that type of stuff. I don't even know, because I think there was I think this was the secularization of it, because we have this weird thing over here, and I think it's a uniquely American, that probably not Western world. We'll just put it Western white culture, because we have none, we try and steal everyone else's or make it up, and destroy the environment while we do it. But I think it was more the idea that it's like an excuse for a party, and then, which is great, because there's a whole lot of cultures around having a celebration after someone dies.
And that's totally normal. But this whole wasteful single-use culture of we're burying our dead and we're going to go into debt doing it, and we're going to also like put astroturf down and get bulldozers in, and we're going to clear the land so it's all flat and uniform and put them all in a row, and all of the things that are really quite sterile. And it's supposed to be honoring your loved one, but everyone does the same kind of thing, and it's just the removal of the individual and the community from it. And there's some cemeteries where you go and you can feel the soul of the cemetery, religious or not. Like, even the beautiful religious cemeteries, like the Hebrew cemeteries or the Catholic cemeteries, or the ones attached, the graveyards attached to churches, where they have this kind of soul to it. And then you go to the ones that's just like that in a row. And it's like, or like the mausoleums. And it's like, you have to find a caretaker to help you find your relative, because everybody
that's obviously reflective of the economic dynamic, that if you didn't have the money to really memorialize yourself, your family was pretty much shit out of luck. We already know that there are a lot of places across the country that are just miles and miles of unmarked graves. You know what I mean?
And
just
we just
literally
found that big one behind they just found that huge one behind the police precinct, right? So it's because that no one can afford to pick them up. No one can afford to do that. And
as such, they count less. There is a perception, and again, I think it's wrong, but I think it's also reflective of, like you said, economics and other unfortunate realities. But, again, if you don't have the money, you don't count. Your death isn't as important when, somebody famous dies. You have these, we'll use England as a perfect analogy. If somebody within the royal family dies, there's a full-on fucking production. And the irony of this is that production, that money could have saved a whole lot of other lives tomorrow and the next day, instead of all the pomp and circumstance that goes around mourning, a concept, what I mean? Not even so much the person.
Public, right. Yeah. But it's the ceremonial mourning, which is this, and rites and traditions are very important. It doesn't matter how elaborate they are, but the thing is, as I said, there's this secularization where it's not religious anymore. They'll put a little religious saying on the prayer card or whatever, but there's this, it's not necessarily religious. It's just like, you have a loved one and you want to send them off, it's the last act of love, right? Is the death care. And you're shamed to feel like you can't give them a proper one, or you're shamed to feel pressure into, following these things that disconnect you from the actual, loved one, as just this piece of meat sack that no longer has a soul, but you want to honor their memory. So there's this whole aspect that's kind of just glossed over, and it impacts your grieving process. It impacts your ability to process. And it's really hard to start caring about the people whose deaths are, that don't count, in quotes, that people think, well, it didn't really matter, right? Or the missing people.
Listen, let's be blunt. It's for the people that are still alive. Those who are dead, they're not participating. They don't give a shit if Gouda is served or anything else that goes along in any framework. Now, again, this is not to begrudge how people choose to mourn and or deal with these elements, but there's an off-balance aspect to it that, really, again, unfortunately, carries over into other elements. And, the reality is most people don't see it unless it walks up and slaps them in the face. I have the live chat up now. Liz, a.k.a. Renfield, yay, death positivity and awake. But Eileen jumped in and she put a comment, and maybe we'll jump back into this because you talked about this last night. And again, it's worth mentioning. She says, stop embalming. Embalming is poison. And you mentioned that, and she's dead on. Embalming is a poison that eventually the bodies break down in the ground. And, short of putting yourself into, a 1 foot lead container, concrete cracks, wood degrades, And all that shit ends up going into the ground. And then by default, it goes into the water table. And we've seen in New Orleans in the Ninth Ward and a lot of the really old cemeteries down there, you can't even go in them anymore because they're fucking toxic and they'll kill you.
And as such, I said that embalming is definitely something that needs to be, done significantly less. Now, stopping it altogether would not necessary. It's not necessary, really. It has to just be done in the only circumstances that is necessary. So, for example, if you die in a foreign country and you want to be buried at home, you're going to have to be embalmed. It's just there's no way around it because they don't really have refrigerated shipments of air flight to fly you back. So you're going to have to be embalmed. And
nobody wants to ship a rotten corpse. So, I mean, we can agree on that.
Yeah, and that ruins the whole airplane. Or there are some contagions, some diseases that are absolutely required embalming, and it's very few. But that's it. But so we should keep it just for the called circumstances for which it is used, and know that for the rest of us, the far majority, it's an aesthetic procedure. So it's not necessary.
But within most of our cultures, there was a time period that how we dealt with it, and especially even within the disease element, is that we burned our dead. We burnt them in memorial. We burnt them again for all those other, logistical and obvious reasons. But there is a case to be, and we talked about this again last night. There's a finite amount of space for dead people. Right. So eventually, and I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but eventually we're going to hit the point that there's not going to be any place left to fucking bury people. So, not if we bury them correctly and without embalming fluid. Well, I'm using the analogy of the way we do it now. The way we do it now is unsustainable. Okay.
Correct.
It is really so far off the norm now that, a lot of people are embracing elements, and you talked about this, eco-friendly burials. A lot more people are going to cremation and just simply saying, hey, listen, you know what I mean? I don't want to subjugate. And, and I have made this very clear with my son and others that know me. I don't want them to incur those expenses and stuff. I don't want to be buried in the fucking ground. I don't want to come back as a fucking zombie. I don't want to come back that way. So just, burn me and, be done with it. Celebrate, love me for, to whatever degree, hate me to whatever degree. But I see no point in continuing these old illusionary narratives about, you got to go on the ground and, it's stupid.
But there is a great way to go in the ground if you do want to go in the ground. There's a movement towards what we call green burials. Green burials are, you're not embalmed. You are buried in compostable clothing, so anything that biodegrades, biodegradable clothing, and sometimes it's just a shroud, or no casket, or you can actually have caskets made of these like they're braided wicker, sustainably harvested, or even a cardboard box. They make these beautiful boxes, and you can have people write messages on them, and you can be buried in a green cemetery. There's quite a few of those that have been popping up, and they are usually in traditional cemeteries, and they kind of just walled them off and said, this part of the cemetery is now going to be green in an effort to move towards it, which is great progress. It's a great, it's
a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction, but what I want to see more of, and this is going to be hard in America with the property rights being what they are, is rewilding. So, what would happen is there's land trusts that have so many spaces for so many people for so many years, and you give your body to them, and they put you in a place that, is suffering from erosion or is being rewilded and reseeded with native plants and trees. And your body goes to help feed that, and they bury you there. And then you're not marked or anything. You're just placed in a rewilding, like in a hole, and you can put a plaque on a tree somewhere and say, so-and-so helped reclaim this forest. So there's like maybe 2 or 3 of those, because it has to be a land trust in America. Because, otherwise they'd sell it off into developers. And, but there are a few people who are buying big parcels of land to do this rewilding with human bodies. And so that's also something, if you prefer the idea of being buried whole into the earth. And it's something that I entertained for a while, but you'd have to ship me somewhere.
Yeah,
but there's also
we're not at the point where it really is.
It's not mainstream, and it's not
not convenient,
accessible yet. Yeah, it's not a big thing, but this is why I'm talking about it, is because we want more.
Well,
ideally, I would love to do that. I would love to own a big plot of land and just have people bring me their dead. Let's bring out your dead. And I would love
like
to do
a Monty Python skit. And it goes to what Eileen was saying. She asked, how can we make people aware of this problem? And there is only one way. We have to have these conversations. We have to put it out there. We have to try and inform people, to give them at least the tools, the options to say, hey, this is here. You may not have heard about it. It's not going to be advertised. You know what I mean? Yeah, you're probably going to have to go out of your way right now, at least. But there are alternatives to, walking into a funeral home and, I hate to say it, but, we talked about it again last night, getting screwed. Most people don't understand. They just go in there and they feel that, oh, I have to do this. I have to spend this money. I have to, go through all these fucking hoops just to get their loved one taken care of.
Yes, to get proper death care. And then they give their loved one over to the funeral home, and then they don't see him until the funeral, and then they're whisked away again until the burial or cremation or whatever, and then they come back in an urn. Where, I think even in the UK, they do attended cremations where you get to go and say goodbye before they, put you in the crematorium. So, there's this distancing from it. And so, yes, conversations about what is like looking into these green alternatives. But the other thing is, write your local representative if it's not in your state yet. So, for example, we had America was the first recomposting site was in Washington State. And that's where you get to be turned into compost. So you can send your body or put into these big composting bins with microbiome stuff and cedar moss and stuff. And you're basically composted. Like they turn you like compost for like 30 days. And then you become dirt. And you can go to the woods. You can be the start of your family's vegetable garden. But it's recomposting, and it's actually, they had one built in Vermont that is now active and running, so not too far from New York. And the legislation changed, and they just in 2022 allowed recomposting to be done in New York State. So they have to build the facility still and everything, but it is something that's coming to New York State.
But there is some progress, because I know, and Eileen hit another one. She's like, people don't give a shit. They won't even recycle. Yeah. It's a struggle because, again, and you said it very accurately, until something affects a person, the majority of people, unfortunately, they don't really, there's no cognitive connection for them. So, unless it directly affects them, it's hard. They're caught up in their other things. And it's not to create excuses, but I also don't want to create an atmosphere that says that, hey, we can't change it. Like, I'm not at the point quite yet that I'm giving up. You know what I mean?
But people don't give a shit until they do give a shit. And they don't even know if they should give a shit, because for the most part, that was quite a sentence. They don't even know if they should give a shit, because why would they want to think about death? Why would they want to think about what happens to them after they die? They don't care. A lot of us.
Oh, listen, I hear that all the time. People are like, I don't give a fuck. Yeah. I'm dead. Why, do whatever you're going to do. Yeah. But, I also made
but you'd be amazed at how many people who you say, well, did you know that these things were options? And this is the new thing. And you could be a garden. And they're like, I don't really, as you said, I don't really give a shit about that, but that's kind of cool. I'd like to be dirt, or I'd like to be a diamond. Like there was a whole thing about turning your ashes into diamonds. that's a thing you can do too.
Well,
But,
listen, I know people who have done things like they've taken, and you mentioned that they've taken ashes of a loved one and they've used it in tattoo ink. I've heard of people who've taken it and use like an amber type of base to, you know, create a stone or some other, you know, kind of keepsake type of, you know, analogy. I saw one and I thought it was wild. They actually would take like a recording of you, you know, talking and everything like that, and then take your ashes and press them into the vinyl recording of whatever words you wanna leave on behind. I always used to make the running joke,
really cool.
you know, I'm just like, well, you know, you could, you know, cremate me and smoke me, roll me into a nice big joint and share it with my friends. You know what I mean? And again, I go from the dark humor element, but like a lot of people.
No, but these are all things that are like new
Right.
rituals, new rites that actually get you a little more involved with the people you love. And I think that's kind of the movement that's coming back, sort of. It's not, we don't really think about it, but we also, because everything is so expensive, that we're like, just do what you need to do that's cheapest, and then with my ashes, do whatever cool shit you can think of.
Yeah, you know, it's not such a horrible thing, because ultimately, and you know, I know this even within, you know, my own family framework, you know, graveyards, they have a context. I get it, I understand it, but this, you know, kind of, you know, illusionary thing about, you know, building monuments to our dead like this, you know, keeping them like a collection of, you know, bones and shit. I just, again, it doesn't compute, you know, to me. I think, again, it really doesn't take into a lot of the other things, you know, when we talk about, you know, how just a simple element like embalming fluid, the toxin that it is, or, you know, the monetary burdens that families go through when dealing with trying to resolve end of life issues. You know, and, you know, you could also, you know, simply make a case that, you know, maybe if we focus less on how we frame death versus frame life, that maybe life would actually be better. You know what I mean? It's kind of a convoluted.
Yeah, it's also, you know, the whole thing with, I love a good cemetery, I love a good graveyard, I love a good memorial, because that is a great tradition. But I think
that's because you're from the DC universe and you're fucking dark. So I mean,
well, there's that, and it's different. It's like, you know, the bodies that are under there are gone, and you know, that's all right. And it's not, it's like a memorial garden at that point. You can plant it. But I think that the idea of the treating of the dead and the what's your want for your death, it also helps free up a lot of your loved ones, you know, labor after you die to have these decisions made, which is also really important to their grieving process, because it is still the way it is. It is important to do it now and get your will ready and have these conversations with your, like, who's going to attend your body at your death. Liz, if you're still listening, we've had this conversation.
Yeah, you mentioned last night that your husband gets your your husband gets your femur, right?
No, he gets my skull, but he didn't want it because he didn't want me keeping an eye on him and judging him. But Liz gets my femur.
Oh, Liz is the one who gets the femur. Okay.
Yeah, she claimed my femur. So, we haven't figured out the details on how, but she's going to be the one tending my body if I go first. But so the whole idea of getting these conversations going, facing the fact that you're going to have to die someday, or, you know, not wake up someday, whatever it is. It's not so much the, I'm getting over this fear and I'm going to move forward and then this is the end of it. It's more like every once in a while touching base in to be like, ooh, all right, you know, am I making decisions that I can be proud of at the end of my life? Am I making decisions that are authentic to me because, and keeping me closer to where I want to end up at the end of my life? You know, couching it in terms like that. At the end of my life, if I was to die tomorrow, do I look back and say, holy shit, there's so much left undone? Or do I look back and say, what a ride it's been, even if it's right today? And that's that's my main thing, is about getting life to the fullest and getting people authentically back to where they need to be, where they're at a place of peace. And also talking about the death, because weaponizing death is a thing that people in power do to control us. So if we have this fear, it's a really easy button to push. And we're being like, and we've just been like herded like they were border collies and we were those little sheep, but just by mentioning the word death or couching these terms death. And there's a really great article on that organization, the Order of the Order of the Good Death. They have many, many good articles and talk about intersectionality and social justice issues in the realms of death. And one of them was how the anti-abortion movement co-opts the fear of death in order to take advantage of its constituents, its voters, its basic fan base, to be like, oh no, we must overturn Roe v. Wade. We must go protest, because it starts with like they're pro-life. That's just the start of it. If you're pro-life, you're saying that the other side is pro-death.
Yeah.
And who's pro-death?
But listen,
who wants to be like,
the irony of it is, and I hate to say this, but in my experience is, when that particular angle is played about the quote-unquote sanctity of life, they tend to be the first people ready to drop bombs on somebody else.
Absolutely.
Or, other horrible type of, life is important here, but if you're brown, your life doesn't fucking count. Or any
You're
number of analogies. Like if you choose to identify something else, you're an affront to my God, and therefore, your death is mandated. So there's so many different angles that it is weaponized, and especially within the political spectrum now.
Yeah, but it's actually using the fear of death, and because they're not trying to get the people who are like already gung ho for, the babies and Jesus to come on their side. They're trying to get the people who are in the middle, who like are on the fence. They're like, maybe it's okay, but not really, to have, be stricter on the abortion laws. Maybe Roe v. Wade doesn't necessarily, they should be states' right. Like those middle people. And by weaponizing death and the fear of death, that's the people that they're aiming at, because those ones that are on their side are already on the side, and the ones that aren't ever coming onto their side, that they're not going to convince us. So it's those middle of the road, and it's basically the whole lack of awareness of the process of what it means to be a embryo, and all of these things are dismissed, because that is the stuff of death. That is the stuff, science is death. And so if you want to do all that sciencey stuff, then you must be pro-death. You're not pro-life. And we know that the pro-life is not about life at all, because as you said, they are the first to apply violence when necessary on their, to enforce their freedom of infringing on your rights.
I like that. The freedom to infringe upon your freedom.
Yes. So
yeah, I mean, if that isn't a semantical oxymoron, I don't know what the fuck is. You know what I mean? But
it's kind of what I do with that oxymoron. Like, if we're going to do cognitive dissonance, then I will go there with you. But that's what it is. It's like this. They are so by bringing death into your conversations, into the reality of what goes on in funeral homes, what you want happen to your body after you die, the sanctity of the life and death and aftercare, and exposing all this stuff, it brings all that stuff out, and it gets it to a place of kind of general acceptance, so that you can see what's being used, what's being manipulated, and also the true threats to life. So by using the fear of death, we can disempower these anti-choice people by removing mystery around.
Thank you for that segue, because I was going to say, and I wanted to make this clear. I wanted to kind of frame it. This isn't to question the dynamics of morality, because morality is a very personal, unique, individual element. So we all have our perspectives on it. You're a mother. You have 3 children, but you still believe in the simple aspect of the right to choose. And it is a framework, at least within our society here in the United States, that we have some of these freedoms, and now some of these freedoms are being taken away. So we talk about the dynamic of taking away a woman's right to choose, but don't take away my right to carry a gun and take your life. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like this, well, how can you really have one without the other? And I'm a firm supporter of, like, listen, again, within certain, guidelines of this and that and the other thing, people should have the right to make these choices. But also on the other,
you can absolutely choose to be pro-life for yourself and anti-abortion for yourself. You can absolutely do that, but you cannot do that for somebody else's situation, and that is,
and especially within a dynamic of morality, because morality goes right out the window depending upon somebody's, spin or some other, contextual dynamic. Oh, they did this, so we have to do that. Or, up here in New York, you turn around in the wrong fucking driveway, and people are just blowing people away. And, we've seen this in the dynamics of the school shootings and a whole bunch of this, because death has become not only desensitized, but again, it's become weaponized. I'm going to get attention by killing a whole bunch of children, because that's what's going to get people to fucking listen.
Right. But then there's also the other extreme where they killed their own children to protect them from being gay.
Co-opted. Yeah.
Right. But so there's a lot of mental illness in this country, and there's a lot of
gay is like COVID. There's a conspiracy.
That is a mental illness thing. But I don't even think you have to jump to the guns to really say that the pro-life and is not pro-life. You just have to look at the fact of the case of the women who are almost dying because they cannot get an abortion for a pregnancy that was wanted. And they're not pro-life, they're pro-bundle of cells. So we know that we don't have to
they want the opportunity to be able to have a child. They don't want to die in the process. But let's go to the other extremes. It has become so restricted that even in dynamics of incest and rape and other horrific elements, that now people who have already been victimized now have to endure an additional layer of somebody else's twisted take on morality. And you and I also know, and especially when you talk about marginalized groups and stuff like that, we'll scream and yell and be like, no, you have to have the baby. But we're not going to help in any other dynamic. You're on your own. So now you got to deal with it and the consequences and however much it's going to cost. Oh, we don't want to be burdened with free lunches.
It's never about the children. It's about control and about our, declining birth rate. And there's a whole thing there. But the idea of bringing death to the forefront, and especially like the school shootings and everything, that is all, I think, mental health. That's a whole different segment with that, because there is a lot there
it's one of the examples of where the whole thing does tie in. These frameworks, these perspectives, these illusions, whatever you want to call them, regarding death and life, now really are part of everything else around us. By default, life is life. So any of these experiences within, any situation can be applicable. Like you said, it ties back into mental health. It ties into elements of violence. It ties into elements of control. One of the things I wanted you to also talk about, and I don't know if it's in your scheduling thing, but the eco stuff, I think, also is one of those things that really also needs to be looked at, because so much of it has become polarized about, the planet's just going to do what the planet's going to do,
actually, this is actually a really good segue from the, what we just said. Like, and I said it's a mental health issue, but you said the forefront, that death, that school shootings, the mass killing of families in war zones, in famine areas, in basically servitude in some places. Just lots of dead children everywhere, and people can scream and shout about it, and nothing changes. And it's basically this disconnect where it's like, well, I'm going to what did I say yesterday was, well, I'll hug my babies extra tight tonight, thinking of them. Thoughts and prayers, right?
Because we don't want to come off as assholes, so we'll throw some phony shit out there and be like,
well, it's not so much that they're assholes, because I'm sure there's a genuine like, oh crap, that's awful, how horrible, and they're genuinely sincere about it. I don't think all people are jerks, but it's at the same time they're like, well, at least it didn't happen it's not going to happen to mine, because there's some kind of inherent little judgment in there, or where did they go wrong? Maybe they should have kept their kid home. I would know. I have this, like, for some reason, everyone can become a psychic or something. I should have kept my head. Yeah, my kids will be protected or something. There's a little bit of a judgment.
That'll never happen to me.
That'll never happen to me. Of course, until it does, and because that is a repeat story, especially in mass shootings in schools, in school shootings. The parents say, we never thought it would happen to us. We never thought in a million years, especially from the first one, but even since that first one, that it keeps happening. They said, never thought it would happen to us. We live in a upper middle class or middle class community. The school's well funded. Never thought it would happen to us. So and we don't. And it's a thing that even as a parent, I had to be like, no, it absolutely can happen to us. So I have my own things I tell my kids, when the protocols go, as to what to do, because we have to start good there. But the other part of it is that disconnect, where it's almost like, and that's also why I think humanity's waking up, because they're feeling it a little bit more about these war zones and these war areas, and seeing these children losing their families, or the families losing their children, and getting broken up about it, because that distance is closing. And it's important because of that distance is why we are at a climate crisis and no longer at global warming, or, talking about global
words get co-opted. So yeah, global warming became an easy one to pick apart and just be like, oh, what I mean? It's snowing. Where's the fucking global warming? And, it is so idiotic, because the framework of climatology within science, it is much, much more complicated, and they do shift in different types of cycles. And you use this analogy, the fireflies. We're killing off species at a record rate, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And these are elements that we don't even really truly understand how it's going to impact us. Einstein famously talked about, we lose the bees, we lose the world because of...
Well, we know exactly how it's going to impact us. It's just nobody really believes it's going to happen to them or in their lifetime.
We don't know how fireflies may, within a correlative thing that we could say, oh, well, they did this and now we don't have it. But you see, you see where I'm going.
We can. So they can in science. If you watch, if you go down that rabbit hole, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, they'll tell you.
Come on, I'm a wolf. I mean, I know what's in rabbit holes, so let's go hunting.
But you go down that hyperfixation. You'll know that there are species of birds that eat the fireflies, and then species of other bigger birds that eat those smaller birds, and then the carcasses that go into the earth. Yeah, there's a cycle of life. So if we lose any of those, we know exactly what'll happen. It's another domino going down the line that we lose about 16,000 more species by losing one. So there is a link there, but at the same time, that's that disconnect where it's like, well, I'll hug my babies extra tight, and like I said, where I had that cognitive block of, well, maybe fireflies don't like Long Island anymore, or don't like all of the life, because I had that. I mean, I'm not saying I'm above it, because I absolutely thought that. Like, that was a legitimate thought in my brain, and I like to think that I'm not a moron. But then I moved to the Adirondacks and I saw the fireflies and I went, shit, fuck.
Well, listen, again, some of it is, again, in the moment, I made the running joke and I'll make it again. If you live someplace where you don't see really the impacts and, the birds are tweeting.
But we did. I was seeing the impact. And then I moved and I was like, oh my God, that was a lot of impact. But it's because I was having these thoughts, and and this is part of my eco grief. I brought 3 boys into this world with the expectation that things would either at least continue, and now we're at a point where there are things that are no longer continuing, things that are very, very instrumental or fundamental, or things that were taken for granted in my own childhood, which means that there's not much. We're not far away from not having a future for my children, which, or any of them.
Let alone our children's children.
Let alone our children's children. And it was like, how you said, I remember, I think it was in the 80s or 90s, where it was like, this is a problem. We can fix it if we just change it right now. We could change it. We were lost so much, but we could keep what we have and maybe get something back. If we keep doing this, the scientists constantly saying the same thing.
I mean, we did it with the bald eagles. We almost, right.
Yeah, 25, 50 years left.
But some of it, again, is in the moment. Like when we realized we were losing the bald eagles because the bald eagle has such, a framework within, the American narrative and stuff, all of a sudden we became more aware of pesticides and PVCs and stuff to try and get them back. And if we just use that model as a universal model, we could make a difference. It's not like we don't have the ability and the tools to do it.
Is that the story I told you last night? It was all when I was in elementary school. It was all we had to save the whales. We had to save the whales. But we saved the fucking whales, but the rest of the world is on fire.
Right. We'll save the whales, but everything else can just go to fucking shit.
Then it became save the cute furry things, which was for a while like let everything else die.
Yes, don't beat those baby seals or fur. Like, listen, again, I have a lot of friends who do the PETA dance, and I get it to some degrees. But, when you're going out there and you're just acting out because somebody's wearing fur when we've got much deeper fucking problems going on, I'm sorry. I'm just like, listen, you know what I mean? That's the least of our fucking concerns right now. You look at elements, especially in areas, of high population density. We're running out of water. Pollution elements have hit extreme levels that at certain times of the year, people can't even fucking go outside. We have a complete shift. And, again, this is just basic science and, take it for what this is. This is another record temperature year. There are going to be areas within our own country across the globe that will be uninhabitable. Okay. Once the temperature gets to a certain point, the human body, you walk outside, you're going to fucking die. You know what I mean? That's why people don't live in the Sahara fucking desert. You see where I'm going? And that's starting to happen. We're seeing now bigger shifts. We're seeing a lot more coastal flooding. You know what I mean? You had mentioned, the one iceberg that's like, okay, bye. Once we lose those elements and we know the prediction models say, well, we don't live in a vacuum. So all that condensed water's got to go somewhere. So, it's going to be an unfortunate reality that, until we lose places like Florida and Boston and New Orleans. Waterworld. Everybody's going to be living on a tanker just, hey, you got some Joe? You got some Joe?
Right. But I think, so bringing it back to, because we just go off, man, the two of us. So bringing it back to the death conversation. But this massive change, this massive, as I said, the country is dying, the world is dying. Bringing death to the forefront, or it doesn't have to be a thing where you think about it every day. Like, I'm thinking about death today because the vampire witch told me I need to, and to get a better life.
That's not what you're saying. Yeah.
It's more like starting to dip your feet into these conversations, starting to really accept that what is lost forever, and that even if you're not ready to deal with your own demise, there is a lot of death around you that it's time to start seeing it and noticing it and grieving it, because before we can do anything about it, that has to come first, because
we have to accept it's real. We have to, and unfortunately, what's happening is that the message is going to get louder. Okay, it's not like these things are just going to just magically, oh, they're gone. You know what I mean? The consequences are going to continue to geometrically compound. You know what I mean? Yes. And there's going to be tragedy within it in a very short period of time. And,
Well, also, as people wake up and start noticing it, they're going to be really, 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 really upset because they were like, well, I didn't think it was this bad, because they were denying it because it didn't look like it was bad.
Oh, listen, it's going to be going to be a full on epiphany moment when a lot of people, and I'm not just talking within our culture, but around the world, wake up and realize that people that they were listening to were feeding them bullshit. You know what I mean? Because at some point, reality does come crashing through. You can only hide behind the rhetoric so long.
Marginalized people who were screaming at us for like 100 some odd years because they all told us exactly where it was going to go. And that's another big thing I talk about is amplifying voices that of marginalized people that get blocked and suppressed and stuff, because they've been saying this forever. Let's jump into that. Let's jump into that next. Let's take a quick break. I'll play a music track real quick, and then we'll come back and continue this. And again, if you have any questions, anything, Eileen is number one interactor tonight. She's, as she says, it's bad for business for people to know it's real. Thank you for your participation. Listen, again, don't be afraid to throw anything out there. That's part of what this is about, to talk about it. Yes, we actually talked about that last night, about the bad for business, and how that was that whole conversation about everything we've tried to do with the best of intentions has been co-opted for capitalism and become a cause for great harm. And we can talk about that after the break.
Cool. We're going to hit it back. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes. I'm going to hit one from Frail. This is a track that Gwen, when she came on and I interviewed her, was very personal, does reflect an element like we're talking about tonight, the loss and, the associated pains. And she was very, very humble and very direct and honest in that she shared that she hasn't even performed this next track live because she still cries in it. She cannot perform it as a live piece because of the deep emotional elements that go with it. And, I think it's a great track and I think it's appropriate for tonight. So we're going to play that real quick and then we'll be back.
Sadness, I
So yeah, that was Frail's Skin and Sorrow. We're back again with Heather Salome as the Death Priestess, dancing around all those uncomfortable little shadows of things. And again, you made a really great point, and then I'll let you kind of segue back into the elements. But you know, how we look at the darkness, and I've said this a lot as well too, and a lot of people are really kind of, you know, it's not about the evil, you know, it's not about, you know, sacrificing little babies in the dead of the night. But if we don't understand the darkness, if we do not understand the dynamics of these things, it controls us. We lose the ability to make, as you said, rational decisions, and especially just in a simple framework of what's better for our life, to have a good life, and then hopefully in the dynamic of what we're talking about, to have a good death.
Yes. And it also, you know, pulling it out, it allows us to really start seeing the true threats to life. And that's like medical racism and, you know, the fact that access to care is not equal to marginalized people, or, you know, LGBTQ issues and dignity and death. Having their last wishes respected. Like these are all big issues as well. And particularly people of color, you know, the treatment of their bodies for death care, while they're not valued alive, they're not valued after they're dead either. There's so many stories of things being built on top of African American grave sites. Like I think there was
indigenous grave sites all the time. We have that problem right here in Western New York. You know, that's been a reoccurring theme, that, you know, we find these old historical sites, and, you know, somebody wants to build another 7-Eleven.
Right. Or, you know, there's, speaking of a recent thing, and to keep it vague, there's no names mentioned, but there's somebody who moved into a home and is having spiritual witchcrafty entity issues, and everyone who's gone there to help has been like, this is a blood-soaked land. There was a massacre here. We don't know what's going on, but there needs to be some kind of appeasement going on. So it affects the people who live on it now, even if they are trying to be peaceful and live with the energies and spirits of the land, because it's just so much pain and stories that have just been washed over and built over. And it's important to, so this is why we do this death talk, so you can get comfortable with it, so that you can see that, and you're not able to be, you're not receiving the lies of, you know, people who are trying to say, don't look over there, don't look at the man behind the curtain. Those people don't matter, you know. And you're like, yes, they do. Why are you doing this? And they're like, because, you know, you want to be comfortable, right? You want your people are going to be comfortable. You're taken care of. There's housing for you. There's this for you. And you don't want to be forgotten in death, and you don't want to die alone, and you don't want to die. You don't want to lose your dignity in death. Come follow us. You know, that's why we talk about it, because it's important for us to accept it, so we can, you know, call the things out as we see them for what they are. And, you know, we talk about the shadow worky stuff. I'm Death Priestess tonight, and Vampire Witch other times, and they both go together. And Vampire Witch is my like shadow worker, and also the fact that I really am a freaking vampire, so there's that. But that's my shadow work stuff, to get people to talk about all of the things that make them uncomfortable. But the Death Priestess is my light work, which is as a light worker, I bring light into this, because we need to look at it. We need to put that the interrogation lamp on it, and I want you to stare at it, as scary as it is. I want you to look at it and really just start to get comfortable looking at it. It doesn't matter if you have to stare at it for like 30 seconds and look away, or even 2 seconds and look away, but just dip a toe. You made
a good point, that this was not something per se that you were even really seeking. You know what I mean? You went out there and went under there, you know, I think at least, you know, from a simple dynamic, to learn to engage in the experience and to get more tools and understanding to expand what it is that you do, and more importantly, who it is that you are. And then somewhere along the line, because, you know, we've talked about it before. Well,
I got tapped.
listen, it's worth
what you doing,
mentioning that when things become structured and framed and stuff like that, that it tends to get co-opted. So we both tend to avoid those types of things because it's a form of gatekeeping.
Absolutely.
It's a form of manipulation. A lot of times we've both had experiences, and Shai has had experiences. I know a lot of people out there have had these experiences where people will be like, oh yes, you know what I mean, I'm the magical mystical you know what I mean.
I am the high priestess of the silver moon of the raccoon skull. I went to the weekend seminar at Sedona, Arizona, and now I can minister. Yeah, sorry,
yes.
That's so bad. That was me being shadowy. I apologize.
Don't fucking apologize, but that's honest. that really is the truth. So much of it, and this happens, you know, again from a historical framework. You know, there was a time period where, you know, if you even hinted at this kind of stuff, that was your ass. You know, they were burning witches and, you know, fucking Inquisition and this. And now it's cool.
Here, come have some white sage.
Right.
No,
witches are in season again. You know what I mean? You've got, you know, you got Stevie Nicks and, you know, American Horror Story and all these other, you know, glamour elements.
Like witch talk made witchcraft kind of popular, made it trendy, made it acceptable. It was really cool to see. I do think that popular witchcraft should be a thing. I think like it's almost like what we call my father-in-law, like an armchair general. He would never want to be in a war, but he could strategize like the best of them, you know, like the archer.
Well, that pretty much happens every Sunday and during football season. Is everybody's an armchair coach? You know what I mean? It's just you know that's how you're supposed to play. Right. So it is part of our culture, I think, to many degrees too. That we sit back and we watch other people do shit and then, you know, criticize and correct everything that we would do, but we don't really ever want to do it, and more importantly, we're not capable of doing it.
When that happens with the witchcraft and stuff, I think that actually allows for a little more acceptance and conversations around it. Do I think that it's a brilliant thing and should happen like all the way across? No, absolutely not. I think people should do informed magic and witchcraft, but I do love that it trended enough to become a little bit popular and acceptable, because let's face it, as much as we go in our path and we're like, well, screw everybody, I'm different, I'm going to march to my own drummer, you know, all of us who are in this community are like, we found our path and we're going to walk it, fuck everybody else who has to say anything about it. We still want to be accepted. We still don't really want to be set on fire. We don't want to die, even if we are death positive. We don't want to be.
Well, the old analogy, strength in numbers. We can find common ground, but it has to be honest. I mean, that is the pure dynamic. It has to be honest.
But, you know, we did the downside of the popularity is the hyper-consumerism and commodification of witchcraft practices, particularly appropriated practices from indigenous peoples, and that's a problem. But there is a plus side and a negative side. I do see that there was a positive to it, but most of it was kind of like, oh my gosh, now we have a problem. But you know, it's died down a bit, but I don't think it's out yet. But so the witchcraft and the priestessy thing, and the death priestess was definitely not anything I was not going to make it my whole personality. I guess maybe because I am who I am. I get hyper focused sometimes, but it was supposed to be just part of the regular training. It was just part of the whole system. So I'm actually going to be learning about doing hand fastings and all of the life stuff, baby blessings, house blessings, things like that. I'm also doing all that. But this is where my passion is. This is where I got the memo from the other side, and they're like, hey, this is kind of where you need to be right now, and it's not what needs to be done by people like you. And I'm like, this is when I said it's a bit on the nose. I'm a vampire. They're not gonna like. They're gonna be like, obviously she's a death priestess. She probably wears skulls and drinks out of skulls at randomly.
I was gonna say the stereotype. Yeah.
Yeah, like But meanwhile, I'm like, no, the death priestess is my light working side. So, this is me talking about advocacy and social justice stuff, but also the skill set of tending someone who is dying, of helping people transition over and having energetic ties loosened up so they can have a peaceful crossing. There's a lot of, I'm also being trained as a scent priestess or a miraphor, which is anointing the sacred oils of transition from life to death, which can be used at all phases of life. Like when I was in training for death priestessing, which is another focus I'm going towards, is creating ceremonies in public for, I'm going to do small groups of ceremonies of miscarriages and abortions, of divorce, of, breakups, of heartbreak. And it's not necessarily witchcraft. It's honoring the grief, the pain, and the loss. It's honoring the little being that was for a minute there and couldn't stay for whatever reason.
Well, it's a true spirit of ritual. I mean, the whole context of ritual would be really, at least for me, when you break it down, is to create empowerment, to create healing, to tap into said energies, to work within a dynamic. Because, again, you flip it around, and I don't think anybody, when, Bishop Hoo comes out and does the Latin last rites, nobody's throwing up arms because, that particular death ritual is acceptable because he's wearing whatever he's wearing and, it's inside a church and blah, 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 blah. So a lot of this is, again, really reflective of the individual. Not everybody believes the same things. There are some elements, be it within Muslim dynamics or Judaism, that will differ in how the dead are interacted with, for lack of a better way to put it.
Well, yes, and I find that with the miraphor work, the oils, you don't have to, they don't have to be spiritual. They don't have to have a belief set. They can be completely atheist, agnostic, believe in dirt. That doesn't matter because the oils do the work whether you believe in them or not. And that's the core of it. To be of service is to be of service to all, whether it's going into somebody and standing next to somebody's Latin speaking Catholic priest and anointing them with the holy oils of Avalon and crossing over.
Because they have been used culturally and historically for a long time. So there are many examples across the board as you go through it. Is there a particular one that stood out for you, or are you more looking at it as kind of a more organic, universal thing?
You mean the oils right. Or the anointing or the rites?
Well, I guess both and or, to whatever degree, I guess either one of them applies for you.
So for me, for the crossing over, I have some blends that I use, but for the rituals, it's highly, so as I said, it's this act of remembering. So if you read my little graphic, a lot of my training is the act of remembering. And for anointing for death, it's very intuitive because, as I said, death is universally experienced, but it's not a universal experience. Like everybody has a different one. So everyone's going to have different needs to be met to be able to cross over. But there's always there's some LME, frankincense, which, that's the one of the church, used to that, myrrh, myrtle. There's a whole bunch, but LME and I find is a good one for that. But the other thing that is a big one for me is I kind of design it based on the personality or what I'm working with. So for example, I created a blend of it's a death passage blend that is for the fear of facing death, for somebody I'm working with who has great fear around it and speaks to the dead on a regular basis, but still can't wrap their brain around the permanence and being one of these people that crosses over. So, it's basically intuitive work, but I have blends and stuff that I work with for that. But for the rituals, it's very, I feel like it's pretty universal because you are anointing the brow, the crown and throat and the heart and this, the solar plexus. You do the energetic parts, but you also do their hands and their feet. So it then and applying these things so they can do the heavy lifting for you, really. But yeah, but for the ceremonies of death that I'm going to be offering, I actually participated and had it done for me for miscarriage, because before I had my boys, I couldn't hold a pregnancy. I had recurrent pregnancy loss, so I lost 3 babies, and we had nothing in this. We had nothing to memorialize, honor, or even really acknowledge it, because nobody knows what to say, and it's such a common experience for women to have miscarriages, but it's one of the least talked about ones. And even if you didn't want to keep the pregnancy and it's like a whew of relief, sometimes there's still a little sadness or a little residual, grief around the little life. And so mine was years and years and years ago, but having this ritual so many years later, even after I had processed and had energy work around these losses, having been witnessed and done this was so amazingly healing and made me come back with such a fresh look on all of it. And it's something that I think is sorely lacking for women in this society. And abortion too, for, making that choice. It's a tough choice. Sometimes it's not a tough choice, but it's still kind of traumatic to go through and have to do it. So I feel it's really important to have sacred space around it, and not just a ritual that, we're going to heal you. It's a sacred space just to be witnessed, just to hear the story, just to hold the space and to release it.
Right, because healing doesn't always happen in a moment. It's a process many times that has to play itself out. I think also to some degrees, and I think this is incredibly important, I don't want it to be taken out of context, but there's certain elements I think that women need to speak to, because these experiences, let's be blunt, they are unique to women. I don't know a single man that has ever miscarried. You know what I mean? And I don't want to make a comical element out of it, but it goes back to, the whole abortion dynamic. We're all fine and dandy as a culture, pointing at women and saying, hey, this is what you got to do with your hoo-ha. But if you even whisper about, hey, guys, guess what? We're going to legislate your dick. You know what I mean? It would just go absolutely off the rails. That's not even, an option.
Yeah, because
so
they went out. Look at their response to the COVID vaccine. My body, my choice. My body, my choice. It's my body. I don't have to have a vaccine. Like, come on, dude.
But listen, I'll be the first one to say that I understand, as somebody who has had COVID multiple times, did the shots and stuff like that. I'm not really, again, that heavy when people listen, I don't trust the pharmaceutical fucking companies. I think a lot of this shit got rushed out purely for profit. And I think, like anything, we don't understand it enough to the degree to really truly be able to deal with it. But we like to pretend, because that's what makes people feel better. You know what I mean? If there really was a collective desire. What's that?
The COVID vaccine. Did you know the story of the COVID vaccine? Why we got one was because Dolly Parton funded the only research facility that actually had a promising lead, because the government wouldn't fund it because they didn't want to invest in it. That wasn't Big Pharma at all. It was Dolly Parton saved us. So
see, I never even heard of that. I just went on the assumption, because I see names like fucking Pfizer and Johnson and Johnson, and I don't trust those fucking characters. You know what I mean?
I know. But she underwrote it because she was watching the community around her, and especially because she has, poverty where she grew up and everything. She's watching people die, and she's like, we need a vaccine. And the government's not moving fast enough because corporations were like in the way, because they wanted to get it there first. And this person had the promising lead, but it was not one of the big big firms or whatever. So they were trying to quash it because they wanted to get first. And she's like, you know what? Have all the money. And she's the one who basically she's the reason we have the COVID vaccine. I'm pretty sure that's my abbreviated version of the story. But
I never have heard that. I've never even I've never even seen it mentioned in any framework or dynamic. That's amazing to me.
If you Google it and you got to look at the, there's a couple articles that you could follow down, and they're all .org, and they're all like, if you do the fact checking, it's true. It's Dolly Parton was the reason we actually got the vaccine as fast as we did. But saying that, I would never force that on anybody, but it's just ironic that a lot of the people who are like, I don't believe the science, you can't make me make my choice for my body, are the same people who are,
right. I mean, listen, it's a double standard. You cannot play this and say in one element that, hey, I want the right to make the choice about my body, but you can't make the choice about your body. And again, it's not about the morality. It's not even really anything more than, the simple dynamic that people should be allowed to make their choices. It's the same analogy why we have freedom of religion. We don't all have to worship the same God. We stole this country basically under the guise of freedom, but only if you're a white man who owned property. You know what I mean? And again, it gets lost in the narrative because we don't talk about that historically. We want to erase that part. But it's okay to be conservative about other things. So, just because you believe one particular element of a thing, and it's okay to be like, what? I don't believe in abortion if that's how you feel. You have the right to choose for yourself how you feel. What we don't have the right is to choose for other people.
Right. You don't have to say that it's wrong for everybody, all times, forever and ever. Amen. It's like we have to differentiate. So, with the death and eco, where were we headed with that?
We were talking. We wanted to get a little bit into the death and eco stuff, and whatever else you kind of wanted to serve on up.
Oh yeah. So I was talking about death and ceremony. There was a thing where we were going to come back, and I was going to talk, but I will just keep going on.
Well, we were going into some of the corporate dynamics of how these things are leveraged.
Oh yes, the co-opting of the when we save the whales and the world is on fire. It's because everything we've tried to do, like even say, let's go vegan, let's do this, has ended up actually hurting the environment so much more than it was intended, because co-opted by capitalism and then farmed out to the cheapest labor, which is exploitative and to the people and the environments. And yes, so we get to this, and what's the solution then? We can't, and it's basically, this is an odd connection that I just made in my head as we thought about it. It's basically like that, what we just said about abortion. You can be absolutely pro-life for yourself. But if you say we all need to go vegan, that's when corporations
nobody wants to hear that.
Let's all go vegan. What we need to do, ideally, is we need to go back to what would have been grown, harvested, hunted, eaten, worn, and near us in our areas. So anything local, or anything that can be done. You can, if you are in a climate that necessitates furs to stay warm or goose down, you can absolutely use those, but you should also eat the goose and eat the animals that furs are from. We got to start doing that. And it's not saying go back to the indigenous ways, because even though they had a lot of awesome ways, we cannot go back. We can't. I like air conditioning. I'm sure everybody likes air conditioning and heated homes. So we have to figure out what's realistic. We need a new way. And we can't say one way is better than the other. Everyone has to figure out an own way in local areas. Mutual aid needs to be a thing, building community up again, because hyper individualization, and the thing where we had that bootstraps narrative and keeping us apart, taking death away from the family, taking the family away from the extended family, becoming a nuclear family, and then telling everybody it's their own problem that they decided to A, buy a house, B, have children, C, take that job and or in my case with the degree, get that degree. Nobody told you had to go to college, except I was told I had to go to college, to get a good job all my life. But, nobody told you had to go to college. It's your problem now. So we have this thing where they want us to keep doing this stretch, this community work without the community. Just have a village that helps. Where's my fucking village?
I don't know. I don't know where it is. I've yet to find it.
Yes. Nobody, and that's what it was like. The village. It takes a village to raise a child. Well, where's the fucking village? That you're not supposed to ask for help. They've stigmatized asking for help.
Right. It's viewed as weakness. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's also, they stigmatize having grief. Like I was talking about my that little video I made for my website or whatever it was, Facebook, how grief is given a time frame. Like you're supposed to grieve. Well, for bereavement leave, if you have a good job, one of these good jobs gives you bereavement leave. They'll give you like 3 days if it's an immediate family member, like a parent. But you get like a day, maybe the afternoon if it's a cousin or an uncle. And if it's a friend, you'll have to just talk to your supervisor about that because we don't know if we can spare you, even if you're grieving. Like we've given you that, we've given grief that much space. You can only have this much space. It's that distancing and that hyper individuation. You got to just muscle through. You got to do it. Everyone's done it before us. And it's come to a point where all of those things that they're telling us to do, and we'll have the American dream, get the house, the 2.5 kids, we'll be able to retire at some point. It's getting less and less like, no, you can't have that house anymore because no. You wanted healthcare? Well, then it's going to be really expensive. And you can't, what do you mean you don't want to have kids? You can't have kids. The birth rate is declining. And, you got to be selfish. You have to have children because, it's an aging infrastructure. We need little workers. And, it's like we can't afford to have kids. We barely have a dog. You wanted to retire at some point too?
No, fuck that. You got to keep working.
Yeah, you got to work at 70. And then so we're living longer, which gives off this kind of illusion that maybe we won't die or we can deny that we're going to die. And just push off that terror of having to deal with it. But if anyone dies around you, you're also not supposed to grieve it too much because you got to get over it. It's part of life. You got to get over it.
It goes back to the old narrative of, don't be so emotional. You know what I mean? We tend to always question why people feel the way they do. I'm starting to think that it's by design. It's by design because you're like, if you're so attached to someone that you need months or years to grieve, and it's not a spouse or a child, if you're that attached to someone, there must be something wrong with you because you're supposed to be all by yourself or by your family and by your, doing the thing. And that's cultural. And that's a shift of the last, I don't know, let's say 100 years or so, where we moved away from collective communities and collective, mutual caring and social and balancing things, life-work balance. And we've moved so far away from it because we were told if you sacrifice for this many years, you get this much reward. And the reward is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But I mean, but there is a case to be made, and you and I are both parents, and we understand the analogy. And I don't want to again suggest that, that it's somehow, if it's convenient, yeah. So, but maybe more so what I'm really trying to say is, sometimes we have to make those hard choices, as a parent, when I went through the process and our second child, when she lost it and stuff, there was a grieving dynamic, but I had a living child that I had to focus on. So I didn't feel I had the luxury of being dragged down that particular rabbit hole because I had so many other things that required my intention. You know what I mean? And I think it's good to sometimes keep it framed, but it isn't also like this static line that says, well, just because I feel that way, that somehow means you have to feel that way.
But that's also because you had to keep it together. You had to hold it together and you had to move on with it.
Right. Listen, life many times doesn't give us a choice. Right. Yeah. We do what we have to do.
We didn't have the choice. But the idea is that if you had a community around you that could have, that didn't have their own stuff because their own individual needs were they were struggling with, it could have come together a little bit more. You would have had more support to have space to take time. And that's the idea. It's like, if you choose not to use that space, great. It's the choice thing again, where I said, you can choose to be pro-life in your own life, where you don't have abortions, where you do all that. That's fine, but you can't make that decision. But the decision implies that there's an option, and we don't have an option. We're never given the option. We need an option. We need the other option for people who need that, and that requires, it's the basic, the premise of why health insurance was invented in the first place. The idea if everyone pays a little bit into a pot, the people who get really, really sick, it'll offset the cost to help care for it. The healthier people who don't get sick, they pay into a pot to help these other people, and then they can get their little aches and pains taken care of when they need to. But that was the original intention, was distributing the cost across many people, and almost.
Well, in its purest form, it's supporting the community to keep the community functioning, because many times these are pieces of the machine. They're pieces of the puzzle. So you don't want to necessarily lose them. And we kind of forget that. And that's why things tend to fall apart, because we forget, you use the analogy, with the fireflies and this bird eats it and that, the chain that, you break a link in the chain, even within the dynamics of our human interaction, things tend to go badly. It's just the nature of it, I think.
Needs to be, and the support system, like, first of all, we have no mental health support, and grief support's really rough. There's a void there, and as I said, the choice, we are given this illusion of choice, because if we don't need it, we never thought that we don't really question whether or not we actually have the choice to use it. It's when you're faced with tragedy of losing a spouse or losing a child or losing a loved one that you realize you don't have a choice. You can hope for the benevolence of the higher ups to understand and maybe let you have a few more days. And if you ask for a few more days, maybe if they're just really, really, really nice, they may pay you for those days so you can actually afford to feed your family while you grieve. But for the most part, you're hoping for that. It's that trickle down, I guess, that doesn't really work.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one in a few.
Yeah, that trickle down doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't trickle anywhere except sideways and up.
We'll coin a new term. We'll call it trickle down empathy.
Yeah, but you're hoping for that, and hope and praying and all that stuff. The thoughts and prayers thing, that's not an option. That doesn't mean that there's an option. It's a wish, So, because they can say no, and then you're like, well, I have to feed my family, so here I'm going to go, and I'm going to go have just frequent bathroom breaks to break down repeatedly and have my mental health really damaged by this further trauma that I'm feeling while I'm having this energetic wound because I am grieving, in order to make things get by. And then eventually, people are like, I feel better. And in the meantime, it's just because they're numb. There's it's this vicious cycle we go through because we think we have a choice, but we really don't. And the only time we're going to find out is in the worst case scenario.
Well, I don't think pain is something that you can really truly quantify, unless somebody, vocalizes the degree. But, not unlike any blast zone, your proximity to, the center of it, obviously, the death of a parent or a child, or, the death of somebody, that lived down the road from you. We tend to frame it in these levels, but the energy that's associated with it does carry over. So when you have these traumas and you have these negative types of experiences without having something to buffer it, something to guide it, control it, and stuff like that, it can literally compound upon itself and create new, better, darker types of analogies, because we do know
newer and better and darker.
Yes, yes.
Newer and better.
New and improved, yes.
New and improved. New shadows with new flavoring.
Yes.
And then you have to
less
see a
filling,
vampire
half the calories, same great taste.
That's why we need more vampire, which is doing what I'm doing. But what I do is apparently not really.
Well, you're in a unique position, and I wanted to kind of segue because you dance in the realm of energies. You know, as a vampire, you're not the stereotypical running around sucking fucking blood from people in the middle of the night. You feed off of energy, and you tend to feed off of negative energy because we both know it exists. It's real. Just because you can't see it or smell it or touch it many times doesn't make it any less real. Well, you can, but you get where I'm going. It's like radiation. Yeah. You know, people don't believe in radiation until their fucking lips are falling off, and they're like, "Oh, I'm living on a radioactive dump site.
Why am I glowing?
Why am I glowing?
Why am I glowing?" Yeah, no, so yes, I do. I feed off the ick is what I do. I basically tell everyone I'm a vampiric sea cucumber because, you know, I'm the sludge eater. I eat the ick, which is something that is not necessarily encouraged in my.
Well, I mean, you're kind of on your way to becoming a sin eater too. I think I kind of sense that in your future.
I probably. I mean, I'm going to take it because I think a senator would be badass. I think I would like that. Coming full circle here, back to my Catholic.
Well, I mean, again, listen. You know, using the analogy, you know, how we deal with, you know, death reflects how we live. You know, if somebody has the ability to take away pain or lessen it or free us from some of these, you know, bullshit dynamics, real or imagined, of, you know, guilt or sin. Somebody said somewhere that, you know, you have to act this way, you have to feel this way, you know, all those, you know, man behind the curtain moments. But the dynamic is still just as real. You know, when you see people grieving, you know, you walk into a funeral situation, you don't feel like you're having a good time like you're at a rave. You know what I'm saying? The energy is just, it's fucking different. It's real. Yes. You know what I mean? So being able to not only recognize that, but obviously to be able to process it, because it's not an easy thing. When you're dealing with people who are grieving and you're dealing with elements of death, there is always that emotional variable.
Oh, for sure. That's where the space comes in, and the holding space, and becoming like an empty container kind of for it, just a really nice container for it, and, you know, witnessing it and appreciating it. And, you know, some of the things that I'm looking into and talking to other people about is bringing back some of the older traditions that have gone the way of, you know, the dinosaur for whatever reasons.
8-track tapes. Blockbuster.
So 8-track tape. Well, I was thinking like
Roe versus Wade.
Yeah. So I was thinking Irish keening, or, you know, the Victorian mortuary photography, taking pictures with your deceased relative. You know, they're usually propped up in the picture. I love this idea of creating like a suite of options for things like that, because they were deemed icky or creepy. And I mean, there are people who are kind of obsessed with the Victorian photography, is because, I mean, it's creepy and kind of icky, and that's why they like it. But at the same time, if you think about it, it's the last photograph you have of your loved one. And it's something you can hold, and it's something that you can remember the day by. And a lot of people are like, no, I don't want to remember that day. It's like, why? Why are you afraid of the pain? The fear of pain and the avoidance of pain is also the avoidance of the terror of death. And you don't want to be looking at death, and you're trying to avoid it. And that's where that numbing comes in, where you're like, well, it's not happening to me. It doesn't matter. It's not happening to my community right here. It doesn't matter. Until it fucking is, and then it's too late.
Well, I mean, I hate to use the pun, but it's an inconvenient truth. We don't want to look at it. I know I'm one of those people. I'll own it completely. You know what I mean? I do not like focusing on elements of death. I believe that life is for the living. You deal with death when death shows up. I do agree.
Well,
however,
thank you for having me on with that.
Well, but listen, I believe in different perspectives, and I also believe in the dynamic that I don't understand everything. So if you can bring unique knowledge and experience. And, I'm not going to lie, I trust you. So I don't look at you like a lot of other things that I'll just, again, I said this to you and I mean it and I say it a lot. I don't trust most people to make a fucking peanut butter sandwich, let alone, dance into any of these existential, realms, or to really have true empathy or understanding for how these things carry over. Because you're right, they do carry over into so many different elements of our life, and we just tend to forget the correlation because, again, it doesn't apply to us in the moment.
Right, and I agree that also that life is for the living, but I also believe that if we live just for living, we're kind of only having a half a life, because we're denying the fact that the death is coming and it's part of it, and it's what makes life kind of beautiful. And I know that's a weird perspective because I know that it's kind of gothy and stuff like that. And I say I'm a light worker, and here I am being a goth girl. But if you think about something like, okay, so I was a florist, and I adore working with flowers. I love cut flowers. And, you cut something and it dies. And there's so many people in the world who are like, people who you would traditionally think like flowers, like, don't give me flowers, they're just going to die. I don't want to even, there's such a waste of money. Now, all the problems with the floral industry aside, why? But they're so beautiful and they make you happy in the moment. Like, to just look at them, to smell them, to embrace them, and to even watch them transition from life to death. And of course, I have so many dead flowers around my house because I keep them and dry them and press them and do all sorts of things with them. But at the same time, it's like, if you can't look at something because it's just going to die, that kind of says something about how you view your humanity too, right?
It's an interesting and fair point, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Because I can't. It's just going to die. What a waste. And I think if you think about those people like that, and the people who say, why would you want to use Narcan on an addict they're just going to use again? That's not a far leap from flowers to that, because that doesn't affect them. They don't know anybody who's an addict. They don't know anything about it. Why would you want to save that?
Right, because it doesn't apply to them.
They're just going to die anyway. They're just going to overdose.
Yeah, Eileen jumped back in with a neat little comedy moment, and she's like, "Yeah, get plastic flowers. Plastic is great for the planet."
Oh yes, artificial.
Listen. At least with the flowers, they're biodegradable. They're going to go back and at least serve some tangible purpose in a framework. You can make a case.
And if you're like me, you just keep them all over the house drying, so you get like little snibbles of.
You can get creative with it. You can use dried flowers in ritual elements and spell elements. So it isn't that far off the mark to say, hey, at least there's a tangible, correlation versus, let's just pollute the planet with plastic because we feel better because we didn't kill a fucking flower.
Yeah, or, it's not just something that's going to die. Instead, it's just going to collect dust, which is even better. It's not even going to give you the oxygen. It's just going to collect dust. But yeah, so that transience is what makes things beautiful, at least in my opinion. And because every life is something beautiful, and it doesn't matter what it looks like, whether it is an addict that is overdosing, that life is worth saving or trying to, or even honoring in its death. Even the guy that we don't like, the big orange dude, when he goes, because he's going to go, that's a life. That's a life. So we honor that big orange man. We will send all of the Cheetos in honor.
It'll be a sad day in Cheeto land. We can agree on that.
It will be a sad day.
Listen,
and it's like,
all joking aside, we don't want to wish ill upon anyone. It's really easy to point the finger and be like, I wish that motherfucker would die. And it's just like, no, that doesn't really help the context because
all of the people who brought him to power.
He's just a reflection of everything else. It's not like this shit magically just appeared when he came onto the scene. He's just better at weaponizing it. I always use the analogy, he's just a better used car salesman. You know what I mean? He knows how to play the angles, and he knows how to weaponize it and create fear. And I've said this before, and I'll continue to say, I do lean left and stuff like that, but I don't trust many of our quote unquote politicians. I think they're all fucking corrupt.
They're
for
all
the most
flavors
part.
of the same ice cream. Yeah.
Right.
They're
So,
all
we get to choose between, shit and shittier or this and that. And I think you said it also very well. We don't really have a choice.
Forever, but that's my little psychic ping for you that I've had for like a couple of years, but it was not going to be that way forever. But, so the sacredness of life is the transient, and everybody deserves to be honored as a vessel of life. And it's kind of hard sometimes when you think of all like people that you really, really despise, or really awful human beings. But you almost think about it like mosquitoes, right? Mosquitoes fucking suck. I hate mosquitoes. I hate the worst reactions to them, those big freaking welts. But like, I will not spray for mosquitoes. I will not use anything that is harmful for the environment to keep them from biting my ass.
No, but I'll be the first. I'll be the first one to admit I'll kill those motherfuckers with conventional means. I'll grab
I will
a
swat
stick.
and I will squish.
Right.
Yep. And I will do that because they're not endangered, unfortunately. But like, these are the things that they matter, even if they're awful.
Well, listen, there is the context to be made that some things, especially if they're contrary to life, and I'll just use the analogy, mosquitoes, unfortunately, they carry all kinds of fucked up diseases. I get it. If you have to make the hard choice, sometimes
with the Zika and stuff. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Sometimes shit has to die, and it's not pretty, and we can own it for what it is. But the details matter. It is context. You look at a virus. A virus is a living organism. We need to kill them, or they kill us. So it becomes a simple dynamic of survival.
Yes.
But we don't have to kill everything.
Right. Recouping their numbers, because at least in my world, I don't see them dissipating. But also they feed a lot of other critters, so it is important. They feed a lot of fish and birds and wildlife. So, but the other part of that is where I was going. I found out. I had the thought about the death. And we're actually, on top of our climate crisis and our other depressing shit we're going to talk about, we're fighting this impending crisis of the aging population needing support. And we're going to have all of these aging people coming out of the workforce with no savings and everything, and they're going to need assistance and medical care and health care. And it's going to be like a whole crisis.
Oh, listen, we're already seeing it in a lot of the nursing homes in New York, upstate New York here and stuff like that. I think that wheel has already started to turn, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So I think there's going to be a lot of tragedy.
Yeah. So and the people who are leaving the workforce and doing this, they have children. The whole system is built on the fact that children are supposed to care for their elderly, but the children here are struggling because the children are adults with either they can't get a house, they can barely make it paycheck to paycheck, or they have a house and children, and those children are young, and everything is really expensive, so they can't afford childcare, they can barely afford to take care of everybody, and then they're supposed to take care of their aging parents, and they can't afford to put them in a home. So there's this impending doom of this, and so there was a creator that actually said, what's the next logical conclusion? What do you think the next logical conclusion is? And he's put forth euthanasia. So that's a thing that's actually a potential risk of what's going to happen is, well, in some states, there's some assisted suicide caveats and provisions for certain terminal illnesses and quality of life. But there's an idea that the government might get a little more hands-on with encouraging quality of life euthanasia as an option. And that's going to be such a problem, because if you're starting to put a monetary value on years of your life. Like, how much is your life worth? Otherwise, euthanasia is an option. Because what happened in the funeral industry, you're seeing a lot more cremation these days because that's the cheapest option. Whether or not they like it doesn't matter. It's the cheapest option.
People can't afford it, right?
And they're like, well, I don't want to saddle my kids with this debt, so euthanasia, I guess, will be a choice. So this is why the death conversation is so important, because what are your parents, your grandparents' lives worth? I mean, and honestly, it's not asking you to pay for it. It's asking you to start getting comfortable with the idea that this is a battle that needs to be fought, that needs to be talked about and brought out of the shadows. So we're not blindsided, so we don't lose people that we really care about because of that until it's too late. So these are things that are like preemptively death conversations that need to happen. And it starts by little conversations here and there. And I think I said yesterday I would talk about how to start initiating conversations about death.
So yeah, why don't we hold that one? I'm gonna take a quick break. I'm gonna play another quick track or two, and then we'll continue this again. If anybody has any questions, experiences, anything they want to share, we are doing an interactive podcast tonight, so this is your opportunity. I want to shout out my brother Jonathan J. Phoenix. A Scorpio walks into a podcast. He's going to be joining me next week. He's worked with me on some music, and he also dances within these spectrums and stuff like that. He has some really beautiful insight and has a lot
of course, he's a Scorpio.
Yes. And he's a comedian too, on top of it all. But yeah, we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to throw in a couple tracks, and again, let us reset, and then we'll keep this going.
Yeah. Sounds fun.
Cool. All right. We'll be back in a minute.
Don't condone. Now I know
Well, that's why I'm just here.
Yeah, well, and we're already back live, so now that part is for everybody else to share. So yeah, we threw a couple of videos in there. Just we were talking about a couple of things off camera, as they say, no pun intended, that are just, listen, certain things don't always need to be public. And, that goes back, I think, to some of the theme, how we feel, how we perceive death and everything with it. We don't have to put it out there. We don't need to justify it. We don't need to fucking explain it. You know what I mean? It is a dynamic that is unique and personal, but it is worth repeating that the more knowledge you have, the more tools you have, the better prepared you will be to deal with these elements when they eventually, and it's just, again, go back to the earlier analogy, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. When does it come knocking on your door?
Right. And, if you have your parents still around, or aging family members, or even for yourself, if you have children or spouse or partner or loved one that, will be devastated by your death, or even if you have pets. If you have pets, this is important too. You have to think about things like, who do you want your pet to go to? If something happened to you tomorrow, where do you get that? And get the animal. Or if you have aging parents, do you know their wishes? Do you know what their end of life care looks like? And if you are in no contact with them, that's a whole different thing, and you've already grieved them probably. But when their death happens, are you going to attend? Do you want to attend? How will you process that grief? Because even if you're they're dead to me already, sometimes you're hit sideways with it, and you're grieving the parent you should have had all over again. So there's many aspects to why it's important to have these conversations, before it's too late, or before, you lose the capacity to have such. And so how to start conversations, sometimes, it can be a bit of a touchy subject, especially on the higher end, because that was a taboo that, you're borrowing trouble, or, I've also heard don't talk about it, it'll happen, or why do you want to talk about this? It's morbid. Let's just enjoy each other's company. Why you got to get so dark, all that stuff. So how do you start?
Why are you being so emotional, Heather? Why do you got to be that way?
So emotional? or why are you going to push me off a cliff if I tell you where all the money is or something that's more my family. Well,
listen, my two elements are, one, obviously don't want to come back as a zombie, and
right.
And I told you the Sam Kinison thing, and I will use the Sam Kinison because we're getting ready to close it out. I absolutely do not want to become a victim of necrophilia. Okay, I do not want to even leave the door remotely cracked that some freak on a fucking meth. You know what? Here it is. Here's the tie-in. Okay, one of the things back in the day, I don't know if you ever heard this or know anybody, but embalming fluid became a precious commodity for drug users. They would take cigarettes and joints and things, and they would dip them in embalming fluid, and it would get you fucking, whackety whack, 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 completely into another reality. It's a correlation with PCP, but it's basically melting your brain, and you're just going through some type of fucked up, drug-induced seizure. But again, some embalming fluid out person, sneaking into a graveyard and basically having their way with dead corpses. Now, again, as horrible as this sounds, and the comedic value, obviously, take it or leave it, but it's actually a real thing. We have this dynamic because people have been caught doing it. So if there's, I'm of the mind, and all joking aside, if I can take and reapply a little bit of fear dynamic to get people to go green and say, hey, listen, and I would put it on the pamphlet, you'll never have to worry about getting fucked in the hereafter. Boom. There's your selling point. Tell people that they're going to get that they're going to get fucked. You know what I mean? It's going to change their perspective on the whole thing. I guarantee it.
But I'm just going to call you out on that because.
But listen, it's a great coffee table moment.
That it's not. That's almost like I live in the Adirondack Mountains, so there's a chance I could get eaten by a shark, if Sharknado happens. So I'll never go in near the water.
But listen, again, we're talking partly comedic, but we're talking about, so listen, we live in the world, if we're going to use the tools that are available, since fear is so weaponized against us and so many other things, turn the fucking tables. Really, I am of the mind that let's reverse it on them and just be like, listen, you don't want to have to worry about some dirty hippie fucking you when you die. I'll be the poster child for it. I'll just be there grinning, looking all fucking. You don't want me to come and fuck you after you die now, do you?
So we're closing this out with the old wolf making the vampire's brain explode because.
No, listen, I have to some degrees. It's part of my personality. I do believe
you've been sitting on that all night.
No, actually, it really honestly just jumped back into my head. But listen, it made an impact for me when I was younger. When I saw that Sam Kinison skit, it was horrifying, but it was absolutely hysterical. I didn't even know that the concept existed, okay, until that moment. And, again, it's one of those weird moments where it was absolutely hysterical in the way he did it, but it did frame in my mind that, maybe hell is better. Like, holy shit, does this really happen? I don't want this to happen to me.
So I'm gonna tie this back into a thing. This is going to be a thing. So I know that's a comedic thing and it's a fear of yours. It's not something that they necessarily have to be really, really worried about. However, as a woman, because the female corpses, in ancient Egypt, they mummified them so they were preserved, but they used to deliberately make the women unattractive for that very reason.
Did they really?
Yeah, because that was the thing, and because they preserve them so well, they just look like they're sleeping.
Listen, I can make the same case. I don't want to be brought back like Rasputin, like some necromancer 2,000 years from now wants to have a conversation with me about, how punk rock was back in the day. You know what I mean? Or just any other analogy where I'm disturbed out of wherever it is that I have danced off to.
But I don't think necrophilia is going to be a problem for you. But there's a lot of issues around. It's around female corpses is really the problem, because there's a whole thing where if the apocalypse comes and the fall of the government, the anarchy ensues, I'm going to feed myself to the wolves. There's this whole swath of women who are like, I'm going to go out and feed myself to nature and make sure that my body is decimated by nature before anybody touches me. So it's a legitimate fear because it's an assault of a dignity, it's an indignity that women have suffered. No, listen,
in destroying the comedic value of the moment and bringing it into a darker, more kind of Mad Max type of hellish future. And again, in fairness, you're absolutely right. These are things that we don't really have conversations about. Granted, obviously, it is a little bit off the wall. I'm not suggesting, that there are people out here right now that are raiding cemeteries and violating your loved ones. But in the same context, it is a framework. And there are aspects of things that we tend to avoid because they are uncomfortable. I think, again, in the analogy using
But you cannot weaponize fear.
Right. Well, listen, Sam Kinison used it, again, from the two angles. He used it from the comedic value, but he also used it to point out the dynamic that most of us, the way we were raised, had this inherent, the fine line between heterosexuality and homosexuality, as men, what is the worst possible thing, for a man, to deal with in death is to be fucked in the ass, to be violated. You know what I mean? It's just, oh God, I've lost my right. I've lost my manhood now. I'm dead. I can't even do anything about it. And it does. It weaponizes not just so much the fear, but in his own unique way puts, the comedic element on it. that, this is the world that we live in, that this is even, like you said, a thing. Like some elements of this, like we shouldn't be debating about the aspects of pollution. I made the joke last night, if you don't think pollution is real, go stand and hang out in Elizabeth, New Jersey for a couple hours and breathe the air.
Take a nice deep breath.
Right.
Yeah.
And tell me how you feel after you leave. You're not going to feel too good, but we have entire generations, multiple generations of people who live within these types of cities right on top of this stuff. And you mentioned it in, the elements that lesser communities are victimized by this, because nobody wants that fucking toxic plant in Fairport, you know what I mean, or in Saratoga Springs. That shit ain't gonna happen. But we'll put it in Newark and Elizabeth and Harlem and places where there are people of color, because we don't really give a fuck about them. So,
or New Mexico. I mean, like the New Mexico where they tested all the atomic bombs and then they wanted to dump
what
the waste
Union
there.
Carbide did in India. Yeah, I mean, Union Carbide literally wiped out an entire city back in the day. You know what I mean? Because there was no fucking safety restrictions in India, and nobody gave a fuck until, literally killed thousands of people. But it gets buried in the historical narrative.
Well, it's because, look at all the progress we've made. For who, right? And that's the problem. Was like we disconnected from, even though we became globalized colonial powers, where there was a hierarchy of the haves not, and the ones that work for the cheap labor, because capitalism is all about the cheapest, best, innovation, faster, cheaper, whatever, consumerism. So it was all about building one side up as the other side got shut down and stuffed down and decimated with all that. But yeah, so I had to bring it back, because when you as much as I appreciate the sentiment of using their own medicine against them, which, as someone who has a petty streak mile wide, I do appreciate it. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is depower fear. And if you use fear to try and depower fear, it just is a pendulum that swings in the opposite direction, and you're going to have the same problems just the other side. You just get to the other side. I can
appreciate the argument, but I'll use an analogy example as parents. And I think this is what my buddy Ed referred to as the Contini context. Not everything is quite literally black and white. I think there are cases to be made. AKA, with my son, I put the fear of God in him. Listen, if you touch this oven when it's hot, you're going to get fucking burned. And I use the fear.
My son burn his hand on a
right.
On a
I wasn't one of those parents that took my kid's hand and burned it so they learned the fucking lesson. But I did use fear. I also use fear in the analogy that, hey, if you're out here and a stranger comes running up the street and wants you to jump into a van that has no windows, I use the fear dynamic to just say, hey, listen, don't ever get in a fucking car with somebody you don't know. Because people go out there and they snatch kids and they kill them and they rape them and do all this horrible shit. And it's the same analogy.
Is that fear? Is that fear?
I think it is. I especially with a child, I think it is. But but it's layered in fear. Because it is true. It is true that somebody somewhere has fucked a corpse. And it's true that somebody somewhere tomorrow or maybe the next day is going to fuck a corpse. So the necrophilia thing is, I'm going to justify my necrophilia bit, and I'm going to stand behind it. I'm going to die on this hill.
All right. Well, I think this goes down to our fundamental differences on how we view people in the world, and this is where
you know what? I'll give you that.
Vampire, and you're the old wolf.
I'm a bit of an edgy wolf these past couple of months. We joked about that last night.
I love you for it.
I'm finding my way back.
You need a little bit of your optimistic vampire back. I think you need to hang out with me more so you can see this. But fear is not a bad thing, but you can't weaponize it.
I like being evil.
I mean, you absolutely could weaponize it. I mean, you absolutely can weaponize it. It's very possible to do it, but it's not.
I know. Listen, again, all joking aside, I will own it. It is a very fine line. It's not something, again, that can just be arbitrarily, thrown out there. some
I
of
guess
it.
we can't agree on everything either, because I mean, we need a little bit of a thing here, where everything was like.
Well, listen,
like
you're getting a taste of it. You got a tribe of young men that are going to start pushing all kinds of fucking boundaries, and I love you to the degree that I can say, you know what, I get it. That's where you're at today. Talk to me in 5 years. Talk to me in 10 years.
It's really funny that you brought up the hot stove thing, because we had the same thing in my house when we moved into our house with a wood stove. And my 4-year-old, he kept putting his hand by it, like jokingly going to touch this cast iron wood stove. And I'm like, don't touch the stove. It's hot. Don't touch the stove. It's hot. Don't touch the stove. It's hot. Don't touch the stove. And he's an Aries with a Taurus rising. Yeah. Don't touch this. And I'm like, you know what? You're going to have to learn the hard way. And so he did it really fast. And I'm like, and he had blisters on his hand. It wasn't severe. So don't like freak out, guys.
Yeah, no. Listen,
but
ultimately, this is how children learn.
Right. And sometimes you have to learn the hard way, especially when you're stubborn ass, just like your dad.
Well, that's a whole nother podcast. I felt that shot all the way over here. That one literally cruised like a cruise missile across Western New York.
But so that, and then I remember back to my early childhood education class, where it's not that they're being stubborn and trying to put, well, of course they're testing boundaries, but sometimes when it's about that kind of thing, they don't know what hot means.
Yeah, listen,
if they've never felt
again,
hot,
that's fair enough, but also conversely,
they don't realize, like, you can explain what a blister is, but 3-4 years old, they're like, "What's a blister?"
I don't need to experience the dynamics of necrophilia to give it its full weight. Oh, see, that's where when you flip.
But you're an adult.
When you flip that one upside down.
You had a very. I'm still going to tell you no. You cannot. You cannot be too. You know what? It's your show. You can talk about necrophilia all you want.
No, again, it's a good shock value moment. It frames into the narrative of death.
Honestly,
I always like
use it as part of your advertising. Like, do you want to talk about necrophilia?
No, because listen, I don't want to chase everybody away, but it is in my own way. I throw these things out there to challenge people, to say, hey, there's another level of things. And yeah, I'm already in trouble.
I gotta tell a necrophilia joke.
Oh God. Okay.
So, did you hear about the new goth dating site? He's giving me a look.
Good for you, Heather. I'm staying out of this one.
Yeah. So the new goth dating site, instead of liking somebody, you dig them, putting necrophilia back in relationships again.
Thank you, Lady Shia, for your total comedic.
Now
I kind of feel like I got fucked. I really do. Like I wasn't prepared for this. I feel violated.
You don't worry about it after death. You're getting there right now.
See, this is all the more reason why I don't want to play this way.
But so I'm so glad that my Death Priestess Sing talk has gone to necrophilia. Like, this is
no. Listen, again.
I know. I'm kidding.
And full disclosure, it's important stuff. This is just part of my nature. I always like to try and throw some dark humor, some spin on things, because otherwise, sometimes the overwhelming horror. When it's like Dante's, Inferno. Once you look into the abyss and you start seeing all these things.
Well, I'm going to call you out on that one and be like, "What? You're spinning it to avoid the horror."
Listen, I mean, I don't know. See, because again, I know in all honesty, I'm not going to leave that door open. My ass is going to be burned. I'm going to go out on a flaming, hockey stick or something. I don't know, but there's not going to be an option for that. I use it again for the pure comedic type of thing. And it's just something that always kind of stuck with me. This is a skit from, some year, good number of years ago. It
had a very, very powerful impact on you.
Yes, it did.
And the sheer horror of it.
How we deal with our traumas, and especially how we deal with any elements of how we perceive death, sometimes the best defense is comedy. I've said it a lot and I'll continue to say it. If you can put a comedic spin on something that you're afraid of or something that makes you feel a particular way, ultimately you have a better chance of getting through it and healing from it than if it's overwhelming and drags you to other darker.
I think context is important for that.
Oh yeah, well that's the continuity context. The details matter.
Yes, the details matter because when I think of that, I also think of Mel Brooks, and he's a Holocaust survivor. He was taken out of the camps as a baby, but he was obviously very impacted by his experience and his family's, whole generational trauma there.
Yeah, but without it, we wouldn't have Springtime Hitler. Right? Thank you. I was like, get out of my head. But listen here.
Yes,
but here's the horror. It's safer for me to talk about necrophilia than it is for you to talk about the dynamic of the Holocaust right now. So
I know.
Yeah. Well, which one? Which one's more?
Mel Brooks, because he talked about writing the show, the producers, the movie, the producers, and why he did it. He wanted to make the most offensive musical, but he also said because this man took so much from so many people, and he holds this power to be like this emblem of
thank
hatred.
you. Take the power away.
When you laugh at someone, you make them small, and you make them silly, and you make them something of joy. And it's not necessarily ridiculing him. It's done so brilliantly that it's just hilarious and a joy to watch, and it was all to make it a claiming of the power back and to confront this trauma around an experience that was horrific on all levels. So
listen,
I do believe that you are right there.
Right,
but
right.
I do think that you're using it right now because we're talking about death, and you don't want to be a zombie, and you don't want to get fucked in your butt.
Well, I mean that's the easy go-to psychoanalytical analysis, but I would much rather embrace the Mel Brooks analogy that I'm just carrying on the work of a great comedian. So thank you very little, which trying to rip my shit. No, but you're not wrong. Listen, again, I'll own it to the degrees, that it is. Yeah, of course. I don't want to experience that. I don't think anybody does.
No.
But it also another great analogy, Monty Python, Life of Brian, that final crucifixion scene.
Yeah.
And they're singing. Right.
Yes.
So, they're dying, they're being, crucified literally. And it is the framework again in relation to the Christian lore. And they put it into a song context to really, again, take away some of the darker, uglier, shit that went with it. And it was their way, like you said, of taking the horror of crucifixion and the whole blood mythology and making it into something that we could laugh at, that we could, not again be as horrified as in, the direct application of actually crucifying people.
Right. And that's pretty brilliantly done. So, that's one way of doing it. But I think that I will still stand and I will die on my hill of, I think you're doing it as terror management. But that's just because
you're just gonna keep going back. You're like a pit bull. You're like, I'm not, you're not letting go. You're just like, holy shit, woman.
I don't. Come on. I don't. And
no. This, for anybody at home that's confused, that this is what's called playful banter. Okay,
yes,
this is sarcasm. This is satire.
Did you know that I am also part wolf too? So
Yeah, no. Listen, it is worth mentioning though that you're right.
Hold on.
That many times, and I will own this, that I will deflect with comedy. Shia calls me out on a time. I'll just go into some random type of thing because I don't want to deal with a particular thing. It is a coping mechanism that I developed. Listen, I'll give the full quote. Listen, if you're going to play psychoanalysis, I'm on the couch now. So now it's my turn. As a single parent, I had to find ways to deal with certain elements of things that didn't translate into self-destructive elements, if you dig where I'm going. So rather than embrace things that could easily take away the feelings, I chose to process them in other ways. So the comedic element, and my mother will testify to this because I got it from her, when you are exposed to certain things over long periods of time, not unlike radiation, there are side effects. As much as we don't like it, it is a true thing.
Yeah.
It's a shitty reality. And then sometimes it's just simply the lesser evil. So yes, we will deflect. We will find ways to avoid the harder elements, the harder questions, the harder choices, whatever they may be, by, putting a comedic spin on it. So you're not wrong. I'm not going to leave you hanging in the breeze and be like, no.
Well, if you did, then I'd have to go harder, and that would just be bad.
Yeah, no, I reckon. That's why I just got on the couch. I'm like, she's not going to give up until I just like,
No,
okay, here it is.
Well, but at the same time, like, I'm not trying to win the argument. I'm just trying to pull a point. Because
no, there is no dynamic of win or lose, because ultimately we all have to live with our own shit. You know what I mean? So
right,
no matter how you slice it.
And anyone who's listening, like, the reason I called you out on that, well, one, because necrophilia makes me super uncomfortable, so it's been my deflection to deflect it back to you. But the other part of it is to show that this is an example of what this could look like when you're trying to avoid. And, sometimes having that sense of humor around anything and taking everything very lightly is a way of coping, so you don't have to do it. So you don't do the work. So you don't think about it too hard.
Right,
and,
you avoid it.
I'm not gonna say that you were doing it, because you've had me on for like 2 hours now, and that counts. You've talked about it, so I think that's very good. You get A+ for putting out that.
Thank you for that vote of confidence. and not to change the subject, spin it around, but I would be remiss if I ignore this. Shai did jump out, and she did have a question for you. She says I love the old cultures that have grief rituals. Does your tradition have specific grief rituals for the loss of a child, spouse, or parent?
So yes, we are. Well, I have a couple different traditional, like I have ones that are for atheists. I have ones that are like goddess worshippers, or like a Wheel of Rhiannon type practice. And then I have just like a honoring space service kind of thing. So I do have the different, and I love the idea of grief rituals. And I just learned about the ancient Greek Adonai rituals, ceremonies that was basically like I think it was like a 3-day holiday or festival that was only for women. And it was one of the few, because it was a very patriarchal society. But the story of Adonis and his death, how Aphrodite loses Adonis and then goes into mourning. The whole idea was this festival of grief, and it was basically just a crying fest. And the women are not allowed to walk through the streets at this point, so they jump the roofs to go to one person's house to mourn Adonis, in quotes. And the whole idea is to mourn the loves lost, the loved ones, the family members, babies, children, anyone can be an Adonis. And the idea is this symbolic group mourning ritual. And I think that that's something that we need more of, where we all can mourn together in unison, even if it's not for the same type of thing. Because for me, I mourn some fireflies, but for someone else, it could be the fact that they don't get snow anymore in where I'm at right now on Long Island. I don't think they've gotten much snow at all. Or, the fact that, or mourning people or pets. Pet loss is a big one, because we dismiss it as not as, why are you grieving over that? It wasn't even a person, and it's.
Well, listen, people make connections with anything. And when you have an emotional bond, it's an emotional bond, just like any other emotional bond.
Right. But there are people who value certain emotional bonds over others, and then there's a whole problem. But so for my tradition, I did learn the circle of unbecoming. That is I learned from a priestess of Rhiannon, which is a beautiful ceremony of unbecoming. So instead of death, it's just unbecoming, because it's the opposite of like a hand fasting. So if you're familiar with walking around the circle in one way, where you go from like light, which is air, all the way to the heavy, which is earth, to solidify something, you go in reverse. And it's beautiful for child loss. It ends with blowing bubbles. And then releasing a paper lantern with your child story on it, or the story of the lost babies, and hopes for them on their journey on the other side. And that's my favorite thing, because that's the one I participated in too. I had done to me, and also I had done to others. So
listen, something I had never heard from before, but it does sound fascinating. Shai has gone an extra step here, and she's asking, would you be interested to do a group morning ritual online for anyone who may need it, and that she would work it and do it with you, make it happen? Would that be something
I'd be down for that. I'm actually going to be hosting an eco grief circle within the next month. I just have to get back from Long Island and look at my calendar. But,
all right, so get together with Shia, and maybe we can cross promote it with you, or set something else up. Again, to the degrees of like what we do within the different circles, we truly do believe in the dynamic of strength in numbers, getting information, having conversations, going outside the box, sometimes, yes, within a comedic level, but, a lot of this and the majority of this is truly reflective of the world we live in. And it is part of all of our lives, whether we like it or not. And regardless if we, don't understand it, or as you said, we want to try and ignore it, it's still there, and it's still going to have an impact.
Yes, and I will go on the other side of this and say that most people who've participated in death circles or death cafes, which is basically a bunch of you get together and you open the floor to any thoughts or topics, and sometimes there's even topic cards or question cards or prompts about death, and it's not a grief circle per se, or grieving or bereavement. You can address it, but it's not a grief support group. It's just about death and taboo. The majority of people who come out of those go, I thought that was going to be a lot heavier. I feel so light, and they'll come out laughing and joyful. And that's where that other part that I was talking about yesterday comes in, is that actual transformation of, it's not so bad. And I'm not alone in feeling this kind of abject kind of fear about, where does my consciousness go? Or is there just dirt? Or am I going to be judged for eternity in hell and damnation? Or, did my so-and-so have a good death? Or what does a good death even look like? And they come out feeling lighter. So, just so you know, if you ever see like a death circle or a death cafe, which is actually an organization from the UK, apparently the mandatory thing is cake. You have to have cake.
That's the old Eddie Izzard skit, Cake of Death.
Cake or death. Yeah, but the whole idea is food and chatting, and so that, and it's or a death
listen,
circle.
The power of any type of fellowship is never to be underestimated, because it really is just another example of communication. And that's what this is. Having these conversations it's strength in numbers. It is a combined mutual experience, and in many ways it allows people to really, again, not have to dance alone, because the bigger fear many times is being alone in this dynamic.
To put it away, too.
That nobody's going to understand it. Nobody feels this way. I'm going to look stupid. You know what I mean? All the negatives that go in that prevent people from being able to experience and talk about these things honestly.
Yes, it also gives you space, because, as I said, even though the vampire wish says you must confront your fear of death and the acceptance, you don't have to be doing this on an everyday. If the fear of death is consuming you every day, then you probably need a little extra help in the form of therapy. But having like a death circle, or a death cafe or something like that, it gives you a frame of like time to talk about it, to think about it, to actually do this work, and then also leave it. Because it's not something that you should just be constantly doing or try and muscle through. It's something that comes up as needed. But on the other side of it, with the end of life conversations, that you should always do as soon as you can, whenever you can, or write down your wishes and broach the things with sensitivity and empathy and compassion. But also with the idea of, I want to honor you in the best way possible. Or do you have anything written down that, approaching end of life care for aging and elderly loved ones is important. But other than that, doing the death work in a group type setting is very a great framework so you don't have to constantly do it first on your own, or secondly, like, I'm going to do the thing all the time now until I get it done, because that's not healthy either.
No, it's the proverbial trying to, shove a square peg into a round hole. If you try and force a dynamic, it tends to do more damage than good. But
yes, like shadow work. Like, you can't force your shadow work for more than, you got to come up for the light. Otherwise, you forget why you're doing it.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And listen, it's a great place to end it. I want to remind folks, if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to simply talk about these things, you also, you're a diviner, right? You're an educator. You dance within the elements of shape shifting. I have the graphic back up again, but www.vampire-witch-salome.com, and that's vampire, VAMPYRE-witch Salome, SALOME.com, and also on Facebook at Vampire Witch Salome. No dashes, but vampire is also spelled the VAMPYRE, not to be confused with those other phony vampires out there. I'm gonna call them. I'm gonna do my Lestat thing. I'm calling them out. Come and get me. I'm in the 19th Ward here, Rochester, New York. I'll dance.
Well, that's the literary one. So the other one's the Y is just it's fancy. We made ourselves fancy so we could not be confused with the ones.
Whatever works, truly.
Yeah.
Because your message is pure. Again, no joking aside, and it's honest, and it's stuff that we need. And I truly appreciate it. Thank you again for coming out. We're gonna have you back again.
Always a pleasure.
Sometime after April. I know you got some stuff going on, but as always, keep us in the loop, with what's going. And again, you can find her on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, the web. Check her out. The Vampire Witch.
In Saratoga too. So, like, if you see crazy,
right. If you're out in the Saratoga area, definitely, I would be remiss in that, because we are global now. So, depending upon where you're at, if you come out there and you're visiting, and you can get out there.
Message on any of the socials, and I will come have some tea.
And explore all your deepest, darkest fears.
Nah, you will sometimes, yes.
Maybe
over tea, though.
Over tea. Yes, because everything's just, it's okay if it's over tea, right?
If it's over tea, it's fine. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, and that uncomfortable silence. I'm like, that's not how I was told it worked.
Yeah, we just have tea, and then we have a little chat, and then I pull all the secrets out of you, and then it's good.
I feel like Doctor Strange is like, there's something else in this tea. Okay.
Possibly.
Definitely.
Listen, my tea tastes slightly tangy.
Slightly. Listen, really, truly, I love you. Thank you again so much for taking the time these past 2 nights to really explore this and put it out there. Again, we'll definitely be having you come back. We got to have you come back out here and do something in a live dynamic here in Rochester. I would love to. Yeah. No, absolutely. We will find a way to make it happen. This is just, as they say, the beginning. We're going to have more of these conversations because somebody's got to do it, right?
Somebody's got to do it, and next time it doesn't actually have to be death. It could be other stuff, because I could talk about my other things that I do too.
Just as long as I don't end up back on the couch. Yes. That's going to be the caveat.
Now you know. Now you're not going to want to risk it.
Oh, Shia's loving it. Shia's just laughing her ass off in there. She's like, and I'm just like, yeah. All right. But listen, again.
Love you so much.
I love you too, and I'm gonna put you on hold real quick, and then I'm gonna play the final track, close it out. I want to thank everybody again for taking the time to dance with us. It's important, again, and I say this a lot, take what you need, leave the rest behind. Okay, you don't have to subscribe to all of it, but it's worth exploring. It's worth, again, having these conversations and trying to at least understand how these things correlate. Because, again, there isn't really a great push by the powers that be. Okay, they don't want an educated population. They don't want us to find ways to work together and change things, because then they can't get away with the shit that they've been doing for a long time. So, again, in some way, it affects us all. And that's where we have to find that middle ground again. Again, next week, going to be dancing with my brother, Jonathan Phoenix. We're going to have some fun. It's definitely going to be a little bit different kind of a show, but it's just going to be a freeform show. We're going to talk about music and whatever else strikes our fan. You know, there'll probably be some stupid dad jokes in there, and pretty much probably won't go back to necrophilia, but you know what? You never know. Jonathan has a twisted sense of humor like I do, so we could end up anywhere along the Contini context. So I'm going to close it out with a track that he and I did called Time of the Phoenix, and it does basically, and just kind of closing out the night, it represents the element of being reborn, how we perceive things, especially within our own lives. You know, there is the quite literal physical death. But Heather made a great point. There are many other levels of death of relationships, death of perception, death of innocence. You know, all these things have a particular correlation. And sometimes things within us have to die for new things to be born. And that was kind of the theme for Time of the Phoenix. So again, I'm going to close it out with that. Until next time, I am the Old Wolf.
Turn back time, then I wouldn't change any life. Wonder how the time flies fast. When I say now it's almost past. Days go by, years go by, life goes by. Time to rest. I wonder how the time flies fast. The book of my life was written in stone. I never regretted all of the things that I've done. Though the waters that flow through the earth go by, years go by, life goes by. You've got no time to rest. I wonder how the time flies go by, life goes by, the times are right to die. Days go by. go by, years go by.